February 2nd continuation of the Dorrance Hamilton Estate Conditional Use Application hearing. We're going to get started with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I will hand this over to our solicitor, John Rice. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Mr. Rice, if you could get us started.
Thank you. Just a couple housekeeping issues at the beginning here. We do have, including Mr. Batt, who just introduced himself, we have two additional requests to become parties to this application. So I want to deal with those first. We also have a third request, Mr. David Willis, who I assume is the husband of Sharon Willis, who was already granted party status back in December. So I don't think, to the extent that Mr. Willis is involved. Mr. Willis, are you on the line here?
I am here.
Okay, and you reside at 335 Stratford Avenue with Sharon Willis?
That's correct.
Okay. So Mr. Willis sent me an email to become a party. I think he's, in effect, because his wife is, he's a party. So Mr. Willis, you're in. The other two individuals that sent emails, Mr. Mark Gato, Gaeto. Mr. Gato lives at 4 Hedgerow Lane. Mr. Gato, I saw that you're on the line. Could we unmute Mr. Gato, please?
Good evening, everybody. Mark here.
Okay. Mark, let me just ask you a couple questions in terms of becoming a party. First of all, what that means is that you have the right to question witnesses' testimony. You have the right to put on your own testimony, and you have the right to file an appeal if you disagree with whatever the decision is. So that's what it means to become a party to a conditional use hearing. So the question that I have for you, in order to become a party, you have to live in some close proximity to a proposed project. Could you tell us where Hedgerow Lane is? You live at 4 Hedgerow Lane, correct?
That's right. Hedgerow Lane's at the intersection of Stratford Avenue. And it's about 100 yards from the smaller property and maybe 150 yards as the crow flies from the larger property.
Okay. Mr. Brosman, do you have any objection to Mr. Gato becoming a party?
Could I ask a question, Mr. Gato? Do you live in Tredyffrin Township or Radnor Township?
George, I do. I live in TE, yes.
Tredyffrin Township?
I do, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Rice, I just would like to know for the record, Mr. Gato mentioned 2 properties, large and small. I think we all know this, but for the record, we're only here about one of the Hamilton properties. I just wanted the record to be clear. And with that, I don't object to Mr. Gato becoming a party.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Brosman. Mr. Gato, you will be accepted as a party.
Mr. Rice?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. There, my colleague Dan Rowley and client Charlie Howder and some of our witnesses are not on there. I see them as attendees. Could they be made panelists at the appropriate time?
Yes. Ian, I guess you'll have to do that.
Can you give me those names again, and I'll add them right now.
Bernard Panzak, Charlie Howder, Daniel Rowley, David Sanders, Eric Hetzel, Frank Tavani, Rob Lambert. That's everyone, I believe.
And just to be clear, an attendee is able to see everything in real time and they can raise their hands and let us know that they want to speak. Is that correct? I'm asking, not telling.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Ian, do you have that then?
I believe everyone now is on as a panelist, yes.
Okay, thank you. The second request I received was from Mr. Batt, Robert Batt, B-A-T-T, at 54 Old Eagle School Road in Wayne. I believe that's different also. Mr. Batt, if he could be unmuted, has requested party status. Mr. Brosman, do you have any questions for Mr. Batt?
I don't. I think Old Eagle School is fairly far away, so I would object.
Okay, Mr. Batt, where do you live in relation to the property that's in front of the board for the conditional use? How far?
I'm sorry,
There.
okay, I'm sorry. I was having trouble unmuting. How far? We're about 200 to 300 feet from the outlet of Forest Lane.
From the property, from the Forest Lane, Hamilton.
Yeah, from the Hamilton property, I'm sorry.
200 or 300 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mr. Brosman, you still object?
I can't imagine it's really that close, so I do.
The bottom,
I didn't measure it, but I just know Old Eagle School Road, but I would note it for the record.
We are virtually at the outlet of the sewer line that runs down underneath Forest Lane. So we're kind of at the apex of that across the street on Old Eagle School Road.
Okay. And Mr. Batt, do you have specific concerns about this application?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, such as what?
Mostly with stormwater, and you know how that's going to impact not only us but the folks on Forest Lane and many other areas nearby. And of course, you know, we've watched water flooding through the manhole covers several times in the big storms on Old Eagle School Road. So and you know, infiltrated into our basement. So
Okay.
that we're just concerned that's going to continue and get worse.
Just one other question. Are you downhill from this property?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Batt is in. He will be accepted as a party. I think he's given sufficient reason why he could possibly be impacted and has a legitimate concern. So I think that is all, unless there's someone else.
Mr. Rice, this
Yes.
is Tim Hoyle, and I emailed you yesterday, but I didn't use the word party status, so I just want to confirm. I said I want to have the ability to ask questions, so I would like Tim Hoyle at 12 Grant Lane.
Okay. Tim Hoyle. Okay. And you're requesting party status, Mr. Hoyle?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Brosman, any objection to Mr. Hoyle?
I don't believe so, but Mr. Hoyle, do you live in Tredyffrin Township or Radnor Township?
I do live in Tredyffrin.
I have no objection.
Okay, Mr. Hoyle will be accepted then. The other issue that came up since the January 7th hearing in this matter is a request from some of the parties to be able to ask questions of the witnesses that testified on January 7th, based on not knowing about the January 7th hearing. I'm not going to go over what happened in terms of notice for that hearing. What the township did is sufficient under the rules. was posted on the township's website. So I know some of those parties have had a chance to look at the transcript from January 7th, and Mr. Brosman has his witnesses here available for anybody that wants to ask. Essentially, two witnesses. Mr. Tavani, who was the traffic engineer who testified, and Mr. Panzak, who testified about landscape and lighting plans at the last hearing. So Mr. Panzak and Mr. Tavani are both here. And I don't know who all of the 20 parties might have questions of these two witnesses, but I'll go through the list of parties who weren't here on January 7th and may have questions for each of the witnesses. Now, Mr. Lambert also testified on January 7th, essentially answering a couple questions. And I know Mr. Lambert is here. He's the applicant civil engineer. Mr. Lambert testified that the size of the townhomes would be 4,000 square feet and that they would have basements. And he also testified regarding the tree protection that would occur for any clearing on the site. And he had testified extensively at the December hearing and just was recalled at the end of the January hearing and testified as to really those two issues. So let me just start with Mr. Lambert because I know he has to go to another hearing tonight. As to those issues from Mr. Lambert, do any of the parties, and I'll read off your names, have any questions for Mr. Lambert? Start with Mr. Shuda regarding that testimony from January. Mr. Shuda,
yes, can you hear me?
You were
Can you hear
here.
me, please?
Yes, you were here in January, correct?
No, I was not, unfortunately. There was the confusion about the meeting time. I apologize.
Okay, just questions for Mr. Lambert then. Do you have any questions for Mr. Lambert?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Sherry rather than, take up more time.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Johnston, do you have any questions for what Mr. Lambert testified to in January? Mr. Sherry? Any questions regarding what Mr. Lambert testified to in January?
Yes, I do. Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit.
Wasn't Mr. Sherry here? I thought he was
here
last time.
He was here, but I asked the residents to try to not each ask the same question, and maybe Mr. Sherry is asking questions for some of the other residents. So
Okay.
That is
pretty limited at this point anyway. Go ahead, Mr. Sherry.
that is correct, Mr. Rice. We tried in the effort to move things along to consolidate some of the questions. So I think I'll be the kind of the main focal point. For Mr. Lambert, can you explain the logic? You have one, if there's four sides to the property, and two of the sides on Eagle and Stratford have a 40-foot buffer, but the residential side on Grant Lane has a 25-foot buffer. What was your logic and thought process in limiting? You got 40 off the roads, but 25 off of houses.
Mr. Rice, could I just note, I don't want to be interrupting all the time, but Mr. Lambert fully testified at the first hearing, and everybody had a chance to question him, and his testimony was limited at the second hearing and did not include this topic. So I thought the questions were going to be limited to the limited testimony that he presented at the last hearing. He did not testify about buffers.
There at the meeting due to confusions.
Well, Mr. Sherry, all that testimony occurred in December, and everybody had an opportunity to ask those questions in December.
Okay,
But
it's just a question that's come up.
John,
okay.
hi, this is Commissioner Mulroney. We did, even in the first meeting, indicate that anyone who wanted to join as a party later could. So I just want to put that out there for allowing questions from prior testimony.
Okay,
for
well
people
then,
who weren't there.
To focus
ahead.
on last meeting's testimony from Mr. Lambert. Concerning the basements, which was the first time that basements have been brought up in the testimony as far as I'm aware. What consideration has been done with the stormwater management plan and the unearthing of all the extra digging? Was that part of your stormwater plan originally as presented, because we had never heard about basements before the last meeting?
I'm not sure the relevance of it, but in general, the stormwater basins, basement or no basement would be, the same. We've had many designs with, basements or no basements. I don't say that the basement has any impact on our stormwater management systems.
The underground aquaflow from the ground does not get impeded by 41 basements put into, I assume, 10 to 12 feet below the ground?
I'm not sure the exact depth, but that, for our stormwater designs, that, really doesn't come into, the subsurface flow of water.
Okay. And then just to go back on, at the end of the meeting, you said the home construction was going to be approximately 4,000 square feet. Is that correct?
The footprints are shown on the plan as roughly 2,000 square feet. And so part of that's going to be taken up with garage. And so you're losing some on that first floor and just saying roughly double that 2,000, which is probably a overstatement of it. But yes, that's a accurate statement.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get, because it kind of intertwines with the documentation that's been presented about the number of residents and who will be buying these types of units. So when it lists with the real estate, how many square feet is going to be listed? 4,000 or 2,000 livable?
It's going to be listed on the square footage. I would have to defer to a real estate agent of what they count. I can only count what the footprint is. I believe they have a different tabulation of how they count what square footage is.
Okay, and so if we split the atom, so to speak, we're somewhere between 4 and 2,000. Is that correct?
Most likely, yes.
Okay, and again, it's 3, possibly 4 bedrooms.
I don't have bedrooms, but yes, I think it's in that realm.
Will all units be the same size?
Typically in developments like this, there is variation in the units.
Right, because so typically, correct me if I'm wrong, interior units in a cluster are typically smaller than the corner.
Not necessarily. There's various options that are usually done. Usually what it is the footprint that's shown on the plan is the maximum. Many, developments of this type actually have a shorter unit, which is their standard unit. And then there are various options that the buyer can purchase, and they can purchase it if it's an end unit or a middle unit. It just really depends on what the final configuration is. Okay,
so in the larger, would you go on record as saying that there will be no 5-bedroom units?
I'm not, that's not my testimony. I understand. I can't testify to that, but
all I'm trying to get at is the size of the place, the size of the unit determines the number of people that are in the community. And if it's 3 bedrooms, well, we can assume probably more somebody further along in their career with a home and probably a husband and wife living there. If there's a larger unit that may expand and be bigger with 5, say, bedrooms, then that materially changes the composition of who the clientele that might buy that. Would you say that is correct?
That's not my professional area, but from my personal experience, I wouldn't necessarily agree.
Okay.
I lived in a 5-bedroom house for a decade without any children, so there was only 2 people living here. So I don't see that your analogy would be necessarily correct.
Okay. We'll disagree to disagree. I mean, it's a little,
Mr. Sherry,
I know it's not your area of expertise.
Mr. Sherry,
yes,
let's ask questions. And I do want to go back to your buffer question. If Mr. Lambert, did you hear Mr. Sherry's question regarding the 2 buffers? Could you explain why they're different?
One's really a front yard was the buffer. And Bert, I don't know if you can pull up some of the exhibits just so we can look at a plan. And it was really related to the code, right? So the code requires a buffer along the residentially zoned property. I believe on the, what is that? It would be the left side of this exhibit. And this is exhibit A11, which Bern has shared on the screen.
Certainly.
And is that what your question was? And then we have a front yard setback along Eagle and Stratford.
Correct. And I believe it might be A6 or whatever, went without the tree ribbon where you can actually see the buffers in. I just noticed there's 40 feet on Eagle. Across the street from Eagle is a commercial property. Stratford Ave is a residential street and there's 40 feet. On the western edge, the left side, where the 5 adjoining homes to the property are, it has the smallest buffer or setback, however you want to look at it, from the property line. And my question was, it stuck out at me that, you know, as one of the residents living in that area, we have the closest units space-wise to our homes. And I was just trying to understand the logic of why it was set up that way. If it's a code requirement, I get it.
Yeah, it's related to the codes.
So
Yeah, I looked it up. It's code section 280-92G. There shall be a buffer of 25 feet along all property line which abuts residentially zoned districts.
Okay.
George, is that buffer a minimum requirement?
And let's just stay with questions for this witness. Mr. Sherry, do you have any more questions for this witness?
Just, and I'm not sure if it was in the last meeting, but because there's been multiple discussions about open space and basically.
Go ahead and ask it. Go ahead and ask it.
The community green and the going down towards the infiltration beds. And is it correct that all of the buffer, these numbers that we have just talked about, 40 feet and 25 feet around, which if you can leave that slide up, it's a great representation. You depict all sorts of trees along that area, but that is part of the overall open space calculation. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow your question.
All right, so open space into the calculation. The community green down to the lower left where the recharge area is, I believe the walkway, the pedestrian walkway into Spread Eagle Village. That is, and then adjacent to the curved parking spots. All of that irrefutably is considered open space. My question is, these buffers that we just talked about, that area, is that also included in the open space?
No.
It is not?
No.
Okay. So the 15% or the 15.9% that is presented on your detailed slides is representative of all that area in the center, basically the green spots. Is that correct?
If you go to, Bern, if you could go to exhibit A, I believe it's A7. So what's shown actually is in our 15%, it's actually shown on this plan to be common open space. There are many more areas that we could count in our 15% that we chose not to, just to not make it more complicated. But you can see the areas depicted on this plan that are considered in that 15%. I believe we can also count all of that 40-foot front yard area in our calculation, but we have not counted that area. We have just included the areas as shown on this plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lambert, what exhibit is that you're referring to?
A7.
Okay. Mr. Sherry, anything else for Mr. Lambert?
Nothing further. Thank you. I appreciate it.
May
Mr.
I step in a moment? I am Gloria Johnston at 17 Grant Lane. I just came on. They have the wrong name for me. They have a name of Tara Neal, whoever that is. That's not me. I am Gloria Johnston, a Radnor resident at 17 Grant Lane. So if that could be corrected, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I have you on my list as Gloria and Alfred Johnston.
Yes.
I don't know what's on the screen.
Tara Neal.
Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, I'm going down my list of parties. Mr. Shuda, I see you have your hand raised. Is there a question for Mr. Lambert?
He's muted.
Mr. Shuda?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You had deferred earlier. Do you have a question now?
Yes, I did. I had a question when you initially suggested that the buffer question that Mr. Sherry raised was discussed previously. And my question is, we are not in a position to discuss any previous questions if they seem to be in consideration at this juncture again?
Well, what we're doing is, as witnesses testify, the parties get to ask questions. And if you don't ask the questions at the time the witnesses testify, you normally can't go back to 2 or 3 prior hearings. Now, we have some leeway here with this, and Mr. Brosman probably doesn't like it, but we're going to try to get all the questions answered. Do you have a question of Mr. Lambert?
Not specifically, no. I just wanted to clarify if we could refer to previous questions, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. So, Ms. Johnston, do you have a question for Mr. Lambert?
You're muted, Gloria.
No, I don't. I just wanted to make sure you had the correct name for myself and my husband on the screen. I do have questions, but they're being submitted through later in the meeting here.
Thank you. Gregory Zari, do you have any questions for Mr. Lambert?
Oh, there we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you. Yes, I do have some questions. The first one has to do with the stormwater management system again, and I know that we've touched on this previously. One question I had asked in the last meeting was whether they studied the effects of groundwater infiltration and how that affects people downstream, literally from the site, and he indicated that they did not study that. So apparently that wasn't a requirement of the stormwater management system. Is that correct?
Correct. We did not study the subsurface flows of water.
I understand you didn't study it, but is it a requirement to study that? What is the effect off-site?
It is not a requirement to study the subsurface flow of water.
All right. I would recommend then that the township ask the question officially that be studied, because I have several points to make here. One is
we're not.
Wait a minute.
We're making questions.
Mr. Zari,
yes.
Let's understand the process before you start with that.
Yes.
The conditional use hearing, just for the board to decide whether this is an appropriate use. The details and what you want to read for stormwater management is something that, if this project advances, will come up during the land development process.
Okay.
So all the fine points of infiltration and volume, that's land development issues. But let's try to stay. I know it's difficult, and it's hard to separate these things when you see a plan like this. But let's just try to ask him about anything that he's testified to.
Okay. The next question is about the trees around the buffer. I know this is a very minor point, but I'd like to bring this out regardless, and that is the trees, the legacy trees, I think was the term that was used, the existing trees that they're retaining, and the diagram showing the by right plan with 10 or 12 trees being saved versus their plan with dozens upon dozens of trees being saved. I went ahead and took a look at both of those diagrams and found that the line of the proposed construction in the by right plan is very similar to the line of the proposed plan. And there really isn't that much difference other than the driveways, the multiple driveways in the by right plan that would eliminate trees. But there's a significantly higher number of trees that could be saved in both plans. And I think it was very unfair to misrepresent how many
I
trees would
object.
be saved.
This is supposed to be for a question. We're getting a speech here.
Mr. Zari,
You know?
we have to follow the rules here.
I understand.
You know, what you're doing is testifying. If you want to testify, you can do that later. You can't testify now. You're not sworn, first of all. You're not under oath. So unless you have a question out of that long statement that you just made, you have to answer the question. If you want to come back later, we'll swear you in. You can testify. Mr. Brosman will cross-examine you on your expertise. Let's do it then, but not now. Now's for questions of this witness. Do you have any questions?
Just one clarification then. Is it in this meeting later on or another meeting to be scheduled that I would be able to testify?
Maybe tonight.
Okay,
Maybe
good.
tonight.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know how far we're going tonight. So are you any questions? Sorry.
No. The rest of my points are testimony.
Mr. Serene, and Mr. Serene is a party, and he's also represented by counsel. I understand Mr. Kevin McGowan is here representing Mr. Serene. So are there any questions from Mr. McGowan for Mr. Lambert based on his testimony?
No questions, Mr. Rice.
Okay. Jennifer Richard Sarhadi, any questions for Mr. Lambert? We can hear you. You can mute yourself. Go ahead, Mr. and Mrs. Sarhadi. Any questions for Mr. Lambert? Are they on mute? Okay, Mr. Heimel, Ted Heimel, 11 Forest Lane. Any questions? Caitlin O'Sullivan, any questions for Mr. Lambert? Lisa Delizia, any questions? Mary Beth Tarunian, any questions for Mr. Lambert? Cheryl Belair, any questions for Mr. Lambert? Dave Satterfield, any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Mary Ann Mahoney, any questions?
No questions.
Bryn Smythe, any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Beverly Hucklebridge or Arthur Hucklebridge, any questions? Tara Neal, any questions?
No, thank you.
Brandon Nicole Moore, any questions? Mr. and Mrs., I hope I pronounced this right, Chawla. Any questions?
No questions for Mr. Lambert, but I have follow-up questions on the landscape. Is that for Mr. Lambert or someone else?
That'll be someone else.
Okay, so no questions for Mr. Lambert.
David or Sharon Willis, any questions?
One quick question, please. I believe the 3 to 5 year construction plan calls for the stormwater system to be installed around stage 8. I'm just wondering if, knowing that stormwater is a major concern for the neighbors, is that too late to begin the installation of the stormwater? Or is it something that could be moved up sooner, knowing that that is a major concern of the neighborhood?
So this plan will not only be reviewed by the township engineer to look at all of the during construction and post-development stormwater controls. It will also be reviewed by the Delaware County Planning Commission in the, I'm sorry, Delaware County Conservation District, also the Planning Commission, but the Conservation District will review the NPDES permit. And as part of that, there are during construction stormwater controls as part of the development. So in addition to the permanent, there's also during construction controls that are put in with a sediment basin to control the runoff. And then permanent systems are being installed. I think what you were referencing is actually the permanent system, and that's a conversion or modification of the permanent of the during construction system.
So there will be previous systems put into place prior to that?
Correct. There'll be during construction ones. There's usually, obviously there has to be some work done first, but after that initial work gets done, there are systems that get put in for the during construction.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Okay, Mr. Gata, any questions?
Yes, I was wondering if traffic's an appropriate question for Mr. Lambert.
Not yet. Mr. Tavani will be back to answer any questions. So
No questions.
Hold your traffic questions. Mr. Bat, any questions?
Yes, I was wondering how effective will the 24-inch compost sock barrier be at retaining the stormwater erosion during the construction phase to protect the adjoining residences, especially since the project's going to be spanning multiple years and the staging plan does not install the active stormwater systems until the completion of the housing construction. So I'm wondering if there is an answer.
Mr. Lambert could answer, but I would like to note an objection to relevancy. This is a land development issue.
Mr. Lambert, go ahead and answer the question if you can.
So it's a similar answer to Mr. Willis's, right? Is we have all these other reviews that are going to happen as we go through the process. But we will have the during construction controls. Compost socks are very effective means to control runoff. The project will also be, as they go around and build sections of it, they will be building the both, obviously the temporary, but they will also be building the permanent as the project goes. It's not that we build out all the units and then come back and put in the actual, permanent systems. They just get phased in over the development.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask one more question?
Go ahead, Mr. Bat, please.
Okay, this may have been brought up before, but I just want to restate the question. If the described stormwater system doesn't function as described or malfunctions in any way during construction, will there be dedicated money available to redesign or repair in a timely manner without delay?
So kind of you have a two-part question there. One was the during construction. So the during construction, there are escrows held by the township under a developer agreement for the implementation of the public improvements, and that stormwater system will be considered part of those public improvements. So yes, money will be held in escrow. After the project is complete and moving forward, there are operation and maintenance agreements that are required as part of the approval process that will be entered into, that they have an obligation to operate and maintain those stormwater systems.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bat. Mr. Hoyle, any questions?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So I guess my question, you've testified to the fact that having both exits from the development onto Stratford Avenue creates the best overall plan. What consideration was given to putting an exit onto Eagle Road to alleviate traffic to Stratford, to the residents on Stratford, Grant, Hedgerow, and the Old Eagle intersection? In addition, does the road classification of Eagle Road have any influence on this process? And is there any statute, code, or other restriction that would not allow an exit onto the non-residential portion of Eagle Road?
So it's a couple part question. So, traffic, I defer to our traffic engineer that can ask the specific traffic questions and answers. As far as the Eagle Road access goes, there is a ordinance section that requires that we take, I believe it's residential driveways from, the secondary streets. They don't want them on the primary streets. And so there is a code section which identifies that.
So for the record, Stratford Avenue is not primary, but Eagle is?
I believe Eagle is, and one of our other team members can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Eagle is a collector road under the township ordinance. I can look up the exact.
Does it have to do with how it's classified or the amount of traffic that's actually on that section of road?
It's how it's classified.
Okay, so it's not so the classification could be incorrect relative to the traffic patterns.
Rob, it's listed as a major collector.
Right, so a major collector. It's just the way that the township identifies roads in the township. They go through and there's a series of roads that they have, or whether it's arterial, major collector, or a local street.
Okay, so but you don't have any evidence that the traffic pattern on that section of Eagle is any different from the traffic on Stratford that's my question.
So for specific traffic questions, I would defer to our traffic engineer that's done all the counts and the studies of the vehicles.
Yeah, Mr. Tavani is here, Mr. Hoyle. Let's hold off.
Okay.
Traffic questions till he comes back. Do you have any
But
more?
It seems like that is very integral to the site development plan that puts both exits onto Stratford Avenue. Isn't it integral?
Mr. Hoyle.
Yes.
You're going to ask those questions of Mr. Tavani when he comes on the way. Okay?
Yep.
Anything?
And then one other question, Mr. Lambert. I think I heard you say that your stormwater management plan, it doesn't matter if there's basements or not. So are you testifying that the plan that you submit, it doesn't matter if there's basements or not? You don't adjust plans for basements?
We have enough separation distance with the design that we currently have. Usually you want to have the basin separated, a minimum of 10 feet from a basement wall, but we have enough separation distance between wherever we're providing basins and the associated basements.
If there were no basements, would the basins be different size?
No.
So if there are basements, the basins don't have to be bigger?
Correct. It's really the impervious is looking from the sky down, and your second floor is over your first floor, which is over your basement.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Hoyle raised something about Eagle Road, which has come up before. And I know Mr. Howder, who's on the line, has had some discussions with one of the neighbors' representatives. And I wondered if it would be okay for us to say something about Eagle Road, which may have some impact on some of the questions. Would that be okay?
Mr. Brosman, let's hold that for a minute because we have one other person who's on the line that came in late who wants to become a party. And her name's Mark.
Maybe we could address that before Mr. Tavani, if that's okay.
That's fine. We can do that then. Let me just go to Margaret Rushman.
Yes.
Ruschman. Ms. Rushman, just tell us your address, please. Ms. Rushman?
I think she's muted, John. One sec.
Yeah,
Sorry,
let's,
sorry. There was a little thing with Zoom. It reconnected. I apologize. I do have a question.
Ms. Rushman, before you start,
Yes.
give us your address, please.
Oh, okay. I'm on 14 Grant Lane.
Okay.
So I am probably, I would say, within 100 feet of the property as the crow flies.
Okay. And your last name is Ruschman, correct?
2 N's at the end.
2 N's.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And you've requested party status to this hearing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Brosman, any objection?
I don't think I do. I'd like to ask, are you in Tredyffrin Township or Radnor Township?
Yes, I'm in Tredyffrin Township.
I don't object to party status.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Rushman, you're in. Now we're asking questions of the civil engineer, Mr. Lambert, only at this point. So do you have questions for him?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Lambert.
Go ahead.
I did speak with you after one of the meetings. Thank you. I think you've been very helpful in illuminating this. I'm more of a stormwater person. You had mentioned something about microbursts of rain have been a little bit of a problem that have caused different patterns of flooding, near-term flooding and things like that. I'm wondering if you, in your calculations for water overflow, have taken into account global warming and other issues like that, that maybe historical patterns would not completely capture, so that we make sure we're, very clear that the houses downstream don't get caught up in this water flow with the kind of adverse conditions of global warming and those conditions.
I probably said something along the same lines. I don't know if I used the same words, but the intensity of storms obviously have come. We're packing a lot more rain into a shorter amount of time, is what we've seen. And I think it seems like a lifetime ago, but we had the stormwater meeting at Radnor Township, and it was a pre-COVID meeting. So it seems like a lifetime ago. But at that meeting, we talked about that, the way these systems are designed, we have a rainfall amounts that we have to follow, right? They're regulatory amounts, and the way we model it is again, regulatory. So we follow those models. But from a practical perspective, Radnor actually requires a little bit of a belt and suspenders approach to it. They only allow you to count, when you do your calculations, the volume within the pipe. Well, that pipe is within stone, right? And the stone has a 40% void space that we're not permitted to count when we run a Radnor calculation. And so the Radnor systems actually have an inherent larger volume and larger capacity than we're actually modeling. And then to hit your comment about these intense storms is, and this is just kind of from observation, nothing scientific to it, but we've actually studied a little bit of that. And it was more, we've gone out during these tremendous rainfalls, and I've driven through areas where it's what people would consider a perfect stormwater situation, is where you have a small woodland draining into a meadow, and then coming down the hill. And in that situation, there was so much water coming off of the meadow, it was flooding the road below. We also went to a site almost, Dave Sanders in my office, when at the same time I was at the site that was flooding out from the meadow, was at a site where we just installed large stormwater basins. And his observation was you didn't see a drop, right? All these basins absorb the water. They just have where the natural conditions allow the runoff once you hit the initial abstractions, and it just lets the water run. These systems are designed with simple void space, right? Is you're actually providing large volume to be able to capture that water and control it. So, putting in the systems is a large benefit that do absorb it. Will there be some storm in some event that would exceed it? I don't know what all of our future holds, but we've modeled for the 100-year storm in a conservative manner. So we actually have a much larger capacity in those systems. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
No, that does. And I think that's one of my bigger fears, is that the math and the equations might not take into account. And then we get stuck downhill and we suffer because the math wasn't done right. So I would encourage extra conservatism because of these types of things that we are a little bit unknowns and all that. And thank you. I thought that was very good.
No problem. And as we pointed out in that meeting a year ago is we are only, you're on Grant Lane, only a portion of the water from, that reaches you is actually coming from this site, right? So we're controlling all the water from the subject property. We've actually installed, because of some of the comments from neighbors on Grant Lane, we've actually proposed inlets on Stratford Avenue, which we're not required to do, but we've put inlets on Stratford Avenue to actually capture some of the water coming down Stratford Avenue, controlling it into our stormwater systems where it would have run around the corner down Grant Lane. I'm not aware of any stormwater basins on any property on Grant Lane. There is some conveyance at the end of Grant Lane that discharges through close to Mr. Schutta's property out to Forest, but there are no stormwater basins that I'm aware of in that area. I know there are some on the other side of Stratford where there were some new homes built, but I don't know of any over on that side.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rushman. Mr. Schutta has his hand raised. Mr. Schutta, do you have a question? Mr. Schutta.
Mr. Schutta's muted.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute.
They gotcha.
All right, there we go. Sorry. John, I apologize. I know you're saying specific questions. I have about the process. I'm trying to understand. You mentioned land development questions have to be deferred for land development. I guess this is a chicken and egg kind of thing. Would land development questions, or should land development be considered before conditional use? Maybe you could help us understand that, why one's first and the other second, or vice versa.
The conditional use hearing is a lot like a zoning hearing board application. If you need a special exception or a variance in Pennsylvania under the state planning code, you go to the zoning hearing board. And the ordinance will say, what types of uses do you have to go to the zoning hearing board for? And that is just a use which gets a little bit more scrutiny than just a use that's permitted by right, where you would go right to land development. It's a permitted use, and you go right into land development or subdivision. When you have a special exception or a conditional use, which is identical to a special exception, except the hearing board is the elected body, it's not the zoning board. It's some additional scrutiny for the use, not the details so much that you would get in land development, because if it doesn't get beyond conditional use or special exception, if it gets denied, there's no land development. So it's not a chicken or egg thing. It's a very clear process in this state where, you get the use established first. Sometimes you might need a variance, and then you can't really go and file land development or get any land development approval until you get that initial step, whether it's a zoning hearing board application or a conditional use application.
So if I understand you correctly, then land development, a project could be halted at land development, even though it's gained conditional use acceptance.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I'm trying to understand.
I mean, there's more details at that level. There's more requirements at that level. Conditional use approval doesn't guarantee anything.
No, I just wanted to make sure our entire group understands that, conditional use is a phase, but the process continues, and land development is another phase, which will be more scrutinized. There'll be more scrutiny applied and could eventually or either pass or fail the project.
The conditional use, the applicant has to prove compliance with the zoning ordinance for the use. Land development subdivision, the applicant has to prove compliance with zoning and the subdivision land development ordinance and all the details. So, that's a much more detailed analysis, more critical analysis by the township. Okay, other than Mr. Shuda, I think we're done with Mr. Lambert, although I see another hand raised. Mr. Howder has his hand.
Yeah, Mr. Rice, this is Charlie Howder. I'm the applicant. And George, I don't know if you wanted to say a few words, but Mr. Rice, I was going to provide some input, which spoke to some of the concerns raised by Mr. Shuda and others, which hopefully will just clarify some of the questions that are out there that are in this limbo between conditional, well, exactly what Mr. Shuda just said. When do I ask the question? And if we could just get the information out, it may just take the air out of the balloon.
Well, let me do this, Mr. Howder. First of all, you said you're the applicant. So we're going to need to, Mr. Brosman, you want to call Mr. Howder at this point to testify?
Yes.
We need to have Mr. Howder sworn in.
Mr. Howder, I'm the court reporter. If you'll raise your right hand, please, I'll swear you in. You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
And state your name for the record, please.
Charles Howder.
Thank you.
So I appreciate it. I just wanted to say a few words and then I'll let folks get on with their questions. But
well, Mr. Howder, let me stop. You said you're the applicant. Are you the owner of the property?
I could clarify that technically the applicant is the owner and Mr. Howder is their representative who's leading this process on their behalf.
Okay, but I want Mr. Howder or you, Mr. Brosman, to identify who Mr. Howder is, what his address is, what organization he works for, what capacity is he operating under, as on behalf of the applicant. That needs to be put on the record.
Yep, I can do that. Yep, my business, I live in Radnor, but my business address is in Haverford at 551 West Lancaster Avenue in Haverford, Pennsylvania. My company is called Haverford Properties, and we've been retained by the deed owner of this property, which is a trust, to take it through the land development process in its totality, including the conditional use process.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Howder, tell us what you want to tell us about.
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for your continued interest in this and for the questions. Conditional use, I guess, the way that we're approaching it and the reason why we have sort of this very stilted testimony, which is sort of expert driven. The Zoom format is unusual for all of us. It's especially unusual for me. I'm much more used to having conversations and especially sidebar conversations around these meetings, which are all germane to kind of advancing the plan and refining the plan. And we had some of those before the pandemic hit, and then we've been relegated to Zoom. So the dialogue has continued. Mr. Shuda and I have emailed back and forth on a couple of things. And the Serene family, which is across Stratford Avenue, we've been in close touch. The entrance on Eagle Road is an example of one of the topics that continues to come up. I know my friend Ted Heimel, who's on the phone, and I think Ian Myers, if you can somehow allow Ted controls, I think he was trying to unmute and couldn't, and he does have party status. But in any case, one of the things they asked about was the entrance onto Eagle Road. And that's something where we're beholden to the township to tell us that they're okay with it. But if the township is okay with it, and a lot of residents have asked about it, we have no objection. If to add a third, we'd have to have the township's permission to do so. But we would have no objection. And that was something that that Ted had mentioned as a concern in the past, and the Serenes across the street have mentioned in the past. So I guess what I wanted to say to the collective group, and then we'll get back to the questions, is that this conditional use process that we are required to go through puts us in a very formal process. And it's a part of the code where if we comply with what the code says we have to do with respect to the plan, which I think the township's advisors will attest that we've done in the review letters that we've gotten back, that we're allowed to do the plan that we've put forward, provided that we meet all those requirements. And if somebody, the counter to it is somebody would have to say that this development is so atypically detrimental as a townhouse development, that there's something about townhouses in this particular location that make it different than normal townhouses in this location is sort of the standard. That said, where I would expect to have a real back and forth and a dialogue and walk the property as Mr. Shuda suggested, and look at buffer and look at plantings, would be in land development. And that's where plans go. That's where the qualitative aspects of the plan, in my experience, and frankly, it's something that we do as a matter of course, really that's where that happens. And so with the Serenes across the street, my plan is to work with them, and if Ms. Serene has an opinion about a planting that's going to be across from her house, get her input on that and put it on the plan as part of the land development process. And if folks on Grant have concerns about how that buffer looks, we're going to have a breakout meeting where it's the landscape architect and those residents talking about plantings and what screens the best and what provides the best result. So this very sort of asked and answered and witnesses and testimony is difficult. It makes us seem very sort of rigid and sort of down the line because we can't get into the nitty gritty of these qualitative aspects that I think residents are very concerned about, and that we want to be responsive to. So just wanted to sort of put that out there, the entrance on Eagle Road as a point of fact, that if the township is okay with that, we are too. And just know that, we fully expect that land development will be a very collaborative, interactive process that we look forward to.
John, I hate to interrupt, but this seems superfluous, this testimony. The whole, and to me, this is chicken and the egg issue. We don't need to talk about land development. We're talking about whether we're going to allow townhouses when the zoning doesn't provide for townhouses. So I object to the recitation by Attorney Howder, because it's got nothing to do with what we're here to talk about tonight. And the residents are correct. If we allow the townhouses, the only chance to fix anything is later. But the first issue is the threshold issue. Are we going to allow townhouses when it's zoned for single family? So let's talk about that, please.
Well,
I have to object to Mr. Booker is totally mischaracterizing. Townhouses are allowed by conditional use. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, Mr. Booker, respectfully, that our plan comes from the code. We everything that's drawn on our plan was dictated.
Guys, I'm sorry. We're not going to continue arguing about this. We're going to call witnesses. We're going to question them. We're going to move on. It's 7:39. We haven't even gotten to new witnesses yet. Somebody call the next witness, and then we're going to keep going.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Howder.
Thank you.
Mr. Brosman, you have available, and I think where we're at in terms of witnesses, are the witnesses that testified last time, Mr. Panzak. Some of the residents, I believe, have some questions for Mr. Panzak's testimony from last time, and then we'll go to Mr. Panzak, and I will just go through the party list for each of the parties that was not here last time. So, Mr. Panzak, you're still sworn in to testify, and let me just start with the parties. Mr. Shuda, any questions for Mr. Panzak?
Mr. Rice, could I interrupt for 1 second? I
Sure.
also have to leave the hearing around 8 o'clock, so I may leave while the questions are ongoing. My colleague, Daniel Rowley, will take up in my stead, but I didn't want to just disappear without saying anything to everybody. I thought that might be rude. So if you don't see me, that's what happened. Mr. Rowley will be taking over. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you, Mr. Brosman. Understood. Okay, Mr. Shuda, any questions for Mr. Panzak?
No questions. Thank you.
Ms. Johnston, any questions for Mr. Panzak?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Sherry, any questions for Mr. Panzak?
No questions, because I guess I have lots of questions from Mr. Panzak, but they seem more land development, so I'll save them.
Okay. Mr. Zari, any questions for Mr. Panzak?
Mine again are more land development related.
Okay. Mr. McGowan for the Serenes, any question for Mr. Panzak?
No questions, Mr. Rice. Thank you.
Mr. and Mrs. Sarhadi, any questions for Mr. Panzak? Okay, Mr. Heimel, has he been invited in yet, Ian?
Yes, I'm here and no further questions. We're good.
Thank you. Ms. O'Sullivan, any questions for Mr. Panzak? Mr. Lesia, any questions? Mary Beth Tarunian, any questions? Cheryl Bell. I'm sorry. Ms. Belair? Mr. Satterfield?
No questions.
Thank you.
John, I think Caitlin O'Sullivan said she does have a question.
Oh, I do. Okay, I just saw that. Let's go back to Ms. O'Sullivan. Mr. O'Sullivan, you have a question for Mr. Panzak?
I believe she's unmuted.
We
but
can't hear you, Mr. O'Sullivan.
While she's unmuting, John, Mr. Panzak, who's he with? And because I was not able to attend and I'm trying to read through the minutes, but I can't find his name.
Mr. Panzak is
landscape architect.
Landscape architect with Glacken Thomas Panzak.
Thank you.
For the app.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Sullivan, are you unmuted? Ian, we can come back to her. Ms. Mahoney, any questions?
No, thank you.
Ms. Smythe or Mr. Rubin, any questions?
No, we're good. Thank you.
Mrs. Hucklebridge? Tara Neal, any questions?
No, thank you.
Brent or Nicole Moore, any questions? The Cholas, any questions?
I have a question. So maybe the land development question, but you have to tell me. So my first question is, the plans which are submitted, it has some trees will be cut down, some trees will be saved. How the decision was made? Has a certified arborist has actually reviewed the health of the existing trees? Or this was strictly from the...
Well, we walked the site with a certified arborist, and the arborist and I reviewed the heritage trees, which is the classification that was described last time. We have not made an assessment of all trees on the site for their health. You know, the other aspect of whether a tree is removed or whether it stays is what's called a limit of disturbance line, which is dictated by site grading and, you know, features that are included in the plan. Existing trees that are outside that limit of disturbance would be allowed to stay, and we've tried to do that wherever possible. And, you know, again, within that context, there will be trees that may be not as healthy as we would like for them to be retained on the site. So we would make an assessment at that point, you know, on each individual tree, and we would make a decision.
And that comes during the land development process?
That's correct.
Okay. And my second question is, in general, do you have any concerns about the landscape plan as presented?
No, we've done the best we can with retaining trees. We've got about 65% of the heritage trees remaining on site, and we've complied with the code.
Okay. No further questions.
Mr. or Mrs. Willis, any questions?
Just one quick one, and it's more procedural, perhaps. When does the Shade Tree Commission come into play with the planning of the landscaping?
I believe it's once we receive our conditional use approval, it would proceed after that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Gato, any questions? Mr. Gato, you with us?
Yes, thank you. I just want to know if there's enough privacy screening will be put in place to shield us from view of these developments.
I'm not sure exactly.
Lighting, you know, there's lighting distortion, there's lighting pollution, there's site pollution, and we just really, you know, I think many of us would prefer not to see the developments.
Well, we've worked very hard to intensify the perimeter buffers. We've got.
What does intensify mean?
Well, supplement what the existing
supplement mean? What does supplement mean?
Add trees.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Gato?
I just want to know what the plan is. And he just said he was going to supplement, but that's not a plan. That's a comment.
Can I make a suggestion, Mr. Gato, to you,
Sure.
everybody else? The plans that you've seen, and it's hard to see on a Zoom call, but the plans and every exhibit that's been discussed is at the Township building. And anybody can go and sit down in a room and go over the plans and look at it.
And the plans have the planning, and the plans have the planning involved? They have all the plannings that are going to be put in place?
Yes, they do.
Yes, yes.
There's 201 evergreen trees and 185 deciduous trees that would be added to the plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, the details are there. I'd urge everybody that's on this call that's interested. You can walk in and make a request and the documents will be made available to you. Mr. Bat, any questions for Mr. Panzak?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Hoyle, any questions?
Yes. So since we're talking about townhomes versus single-family private homes, Mr. Panzak, in your opinion, the landscaping with the townhomes, is that going to be consistent with the private family homes that are adjacent to this property? And do you think that it's something that you would want to have in your backyard? And as a landscape architect, do you believe that it will be as attractive as single family homes, which are zoned for this property?
I'm going to object. The way he phrased the question is argumentative.
I didn't mean to be argumentative. I apologize. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't. I'm sorry. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how to phrase questions.
We're not here to decide one or the other. We're here for this plan.
Well,
I
look,
just want to note that for the record.
Well, but isn't the question that the alternative is single family homes? And if I am John, if I'm familiar with the plans, they've only shown landscaping and trees around townhomes. They haven't shown any landscaping and trees around single family homes, unless I'm incorrect. Am I incorrect?
Mr. Hoyle, let me just explain. The property, you could build single family homes there, or if you choose the density modification option, you can build townhomes or single family homes under the density modification option. So they've chosen to build the townhomes under the current zoning which exists. So that's an issue that'll be before the board, whether that's appropriate for the site. So
how does landscaping enter into the board's decision? And that's what I'm asking, I think.
Well, landscaping and layout are items that are discussed in the density modification provisions of the zoning ordinance. And in addition to the plans that are available, I would encourage everybody to get on the township's website and look up the density modification provisions of the zoning ordinance so you understand what the standards are. They are found at section 280-90 of the township zoning ordinance. And they include about 10 or 12 pages of details. That is what's in front of the board. Does this plan meet those details? Not land development, not would you want townhomes being built next to you? That's the standard. So,
okay, so I'm just a citizen trying to I'm leaving my day job, coming to this. I apologize for asking a bad question, but I think I just am trying to figure out.
Mr. Hoyle,
yes.
Hoyle, there's never a bad question.
Thank you.
Never a bad question.
Only bad people.
I'm going to ask you, do you have another question of Mr. Panzak?
So my question won't be answered?
What's your question?
My question was, and I guess this is that the landscape and the nature of the community going to be consistent with the existing community, or would, from a landscape architecture professional opinion, would it be more consistent if single family homes were built?
Mr. Panzak, I think you can answer that question. Go ahead and answer that question.
Right. What we know is that under the density modification provisions, there are more and more required buffer areas in this code provision that we've provided within the context of the plan. So we have buffers. We've provided a lot of landscaping at the perimeter, and it's code compliant landscaping. And I believe it will be a very appropriate edge, and that the goal would be to provide a a very significant visual screen at the edges.
Thank you. I did not mean to be combative, George. I apologize.
Okay. Mr.
No
Hoyle,
need to apologize. We're all just doing our best.
anything else, Mr. Hoyle?
No, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Rushman, any questions for Mr. Panzak?
No, but thank you. That last explanation was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So I think Mr. Panzak's testimony is done at this point. Everybody's gotten an opportunity that wasn't here in January to ask questions. I think we have Mr. Tavani. Would the board like to take a break? Would the court reporter like to take a break?
I'm okay for a while.
Okay. All right, then let's move to Mr. Tavani,
Thank you.
and we'll go through the same process. I'll just go through the list of the parties, and if anyone has any questions about traffic. Mr. Tavani is the township, the applicant's traffic engineer, and he did a study which he testified to in January. So let me start with Mr. Mr. Shuda. Any questions for Mr. Tavani?
No questions. Thank you, John.
Okay. Gloria or Alfred Johnston, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Sherry?
Just one quick question for Mr. Tavani, since he's got expertise in the roads around. How concerning the community and bridge heights and everything, tight 90-degree turns with all of the roads, how do you envision as a traffic specialist that all of the construction equipment gets on and off the property? If that makes sense. There's a low bridge, for traffic coming from the west over on Old Eagle School Road that large vehicles can't go through. Lancaster Ave with the tractor trailer is challenging. What do you see? Do you see any issues based upon the road structure as it currently exists?
No, I do not. Construction has taken place in the general vicinity in the past, including in the recent past. I understand what your issue is, and I'm sure that the construction equipment staff in charge of routing vehicles will be well aware of restrictions and avoid them and route the trucks in whatever means is necessary.
I guess the follow-on to that is, as proposed, we've discussed ad nauseum tonight, the entrances as they stand right now are both on Stratford Ave, probably a 28-foot wide road, 2 lanes, with the tractor trailer turning 90 degrees in. Once both construction entrances are on the Stratford Road, foreseeing traffic issues out of that, everybody going to be able to make the turn, that kind of thing. I mean, I think of big earth movers on a flatbed, that kind of situation. Has that been thoroughly thought out in this process?
I have not explored the compatibility of construction vehicle wheelbases with intersection radii. As we've heard frequently, we are at conditional use. I think that is a very specific land development issue. And I think that if there is a vehicle that's incompatible with turning radii or road width, that the trucks that will be utilized will be instead compatible with the roadways. I'm sure there are tractor trailers that make deliveries in the area today, and I'm sure all that will be taken into proper consideration.
I just wanted your expertise now because I wasn't sure if you were going to be around for land development. So that's why I'm asking you.
I hope to be around.
Asking you a question. One just last quick question. Where, I guess, the northeastern closest to Eagle Road, where that exit is, do you know how many feet it is between that exit and the stop sign that's currently exists?
I do not, but another colleague may be able to assist me with that.
All I'm trying to get at from a traffic stand, is there a potential that if you got 2, maybe 3 cars stopped at the stop sign, that it impedes the exit out of the development?
I think it will be more than 2. I'm looking at a plan right now, and just by my eye, it appears to be about 120 to 150 feet from the stop bar on Stafford at Eagle back to the closest driveway. So that would translate to a pretty significant queue of vehicles. Typically at all-way stop-controlled intersections, queues very seldom exceed 2 vehicles in length, which from a practical standpoint translates to about 40 to 50 feet. So I think it would be very unlikely that a queue eastbound on Stratford Avenue originating at Eagle Road would ever extend to the point where it would block the east side driveway.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Zari, any questions?
Yes, and please correct me if this is a development question. Is there any way to prevent construction vehicles or construction workers from using the land portion that connects to Forest Lane? It's a small street, but I could see someone trying to gain site access from that. Is there any way to prevent that from occurring?
Well, I think the most logical way to prevent that would be, as the applicant is negotiating its contracts with the various vendors who would be building the site, that they would make them aware as part of the process to stay away from that location.
Yeah, and this is Daniel Rowley. George Brosman had to step out for a minute. I represent the applicants. The management of the construction vehicles, that's something that will be taken care of at land development.
Thank you.
Mr. Zari, anything else?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. McGowan. Kevin McGowan for the Serenes.
Sorry about that. No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Jennifer Richards or Radii, any questions? Ted Heimel.
Yes, I'm here. 2 questions real quick. So to Mr. Howder, if you're still on, that's great that you guys are making some progress and some movement on at least adding an access road onto Eagle Road. So if you're going eastbound on Lancaster, I think that's definitely going to cut down on some of the traffic on Stratford. So just a question, you mentioned that it's more of an approval process. So this is a procedural question, I guess. It's more of just, it's up to the township. Are there any other potential hurdles? So like, to make it super simple, if you just say, hey, I want to have an access road, do you think the township just says yes? Is that a fair question or a fair assessment or a fair assumption?
I'll take a shot at answering your question, and Mr. Rice.
It's an assumption question. I get it.
Yeah. So we're amenable to it. The township, I think, would have to grant us some relief under their code because of a technical designation of Eagle Road and what would be required there. But if the township is amenable to the concept, it's absolutely within their power to give us that permission.
Okay.
In which case,
yeah,
as I said, we're amenable to it. So
yeah, I think it's good that you guys are showing some movement towards that direction. Like I think there's traffic and stormwater in no particular order are 2 big concerns for the residents. I don't want to speak for everybody, but clearly that's pretty much known. So I think that would alleviate some of the concern there. So that's good. So let's just hopefully keep making progress on traffic. So I think this may be me for Mr. Tavani. So if you're talking about 41 homes, have you guys done a study or an estimation? And again, a ballpark is fine, of how many potential cars we're talking about in a development. Is it 2 per home that you're assuming? Obviously, if you're talking about projecting traffic patterns with dropping in this type of development, you're probably basing that on an assumption of how many cars per home you're assuming, correct?
Not quite. This was covered at the first hearing that I offered my direct testimony. The The traffic activity, if that's what you're inquiring about, is a function of strictly the unit count and the unit type. And that is something promulgated by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, or ITE. They make available these manuals that contain reams of empirical data. And essentially you choose the appropriate land use code, such as detached housing or attached housing. And then you plug in the number of units and it gives you outputs such as commuter peak hour trip generation, they call it, or traffic activity, daily traffic activity, et cetera. And that is what I used as the basis for my level of service calculations. And
just a number of how many cars you're expecting. Just make it super simple. Are you talking?
Are you talking
80?
about the number? Are you talking about the number of parked cars, cars owned, or moving cars during peak hours?
Cars that you're anticipating that in the worst case are all moving at the same time, which is a worst case scenario. Are you talking? So I'm thinking 41 homes, there's probably 2 cars per home, right? You're not anticipating 3 or 4, and you're probably not anticipating 1. It's just a simple question. What's your assumption?
It is a simple question, but I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. There's a difference between car ownership and moving cars. A house can have 10 cars in its ownership, but if there's only one person owning those cars, there's only one car that can move.
Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overcomplicate it. I'm just saying in your
Mr.
worst
Heimel,
case scenario.
Mr. Heimel.
Well, hold on. I'm just responding to what he's saying though. So I think it's fair.
You're not a witness, sir, and you're interrupting this witness. Let him finish his answer and then ask another question. Thank you.
The peak hour trip generation for the site is 27 vehicles or less.
And what's that based on?
ITE trip generation manual, latest edition.
Okay. So in your worst case scenario, during peak hours, 27 vehicles would be going in either direction on Stratford or possibly exiting out the new, if the township permits it, out to Eagle Road. Is that what you're saying? I just want to clarify what you're saying.
What I'm saying is the typical daily, on a typical day, the peak hour trip generation, all activity in and out of this site will be 27 vehicles or less in a 60-minute period.
Okay, and you guys do not foresee any issue if you're going westbound on Stratford and I guess going, well, either left or right on Old Eagle. Based on your assumptions, all your data, you're saying that it's going to be fine. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that the exhibit demonstrates of the intersections we studied, the level of service impact of the site is either not measurable or very minimal.
Okay, I heard his answer, so no further questions.
Thank you.
I don't know if I agree with the answer, but.
So Sullivan,
okay, thank you.
So Sullivan, any questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, 2 questions. The first one is, if you were to go and redo the May 2019 traffic study today and find that traffic has doubled since May 2019 as an example, would that have a material impact on your traffic assessment?
I don't know.
Okay, I'll word it another way. If the May 2019 traffic study indicated that twice the amount of traffic, so I guess 54 cars instead of 27 cars, would that change your recommendation?
I'm going to object to the question. It's calling for speculation.
Okay. So we listened to another question, then I'll completely change course here. So we listened to your testimony at the last meeting, and is there ever a circumstance when you found the ITE manual to be a poor representation of a specific neighborhood?
I don't believe I've ever investigated the situation that you just described.
Do you know of any situations where one, such as yourself or another professional in your capacity, would adjust the model to account for differences with different neighborhoods or different demographics?
No.
That's it.
Thank you. David Satterfield, any questions?
No questions.
Mary Ann Mahoney, any questions for Mr. Tavani?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Bryn Smythe or Jack Rubin, any questions?
No questions.
Tara Neal, any questions? Brent or Nicole Moore? The Chawlas?
No questions. Thank you.
The Willises, any questions?
Does the traffic study include pedestrian traffic as well?
Pedestrians are included in data collection efforts, if that is the basis of your question. If your question is more directed at are pedestrians considered in the site design and site layout, that answer is also yes. Although that is more of a planning exercise than a traffic engineer investigation.
Okay, and I guess my concern is that given the location, I would think that many residents will be trying to walk to the Stratford train station. And I just want to ensure that we're not creating an unsafe situation with more pedestrians on Stratford Avenue.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Tavani, that statement?
I don't believe the site will create an unsafe situation with regard to pedestrians.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Mr. Gato, any questions?
Yeah, I wasn't at the last meeting. I was just curious as to how many intersections were included in the study, Frank?
3.
What 3 were they?
They were the intersection of Stratford and Eagle. Hold on, let me pull that up exactly. The intersection of Stratford and Eagle, Stratford and Grant Hedgerow, and Eagle and North Wayne Avenue.
Eagle and North Wayne.
Yes.
Was there, I mean, considering all the traffic that takes place on 30, why wasn't St. Old Eagle? I'm sorry, why wasn't Eagle and Lancaster considered?
So a traffic engineer always starts with the intersections closest to the site to determine if there's significant impact there. The further removed an intersection is from a site, the less site traffic there is because of the nature of trip distribution. In this case, some traffic upon leaving the site, for example, will head west, some will head east. The traffic that heads east will intersect Eagle, some of that traffic will head north, and some will head south. In each case, the number gets smaller and smaller. So I chose the 2 intersections closest to the site and found that the impact was very small and probably could have stopped right there at Stratford and Grant / Hedgerow or Stratford and Eagle. I just went a little bit further to the north. Didn't really have to because, as you can see from the level of service comparison tables in my exhibit, there was no measurable impact at all at that intersection. If I went even further to the south at Lancaster, which has more underlying existing traffic, the impact of the site would have been even less. So it stands to reason that once again, the impact of the site on the intersection would have been unmeasurable. So essentially, I used some engineering judgment about how to design the study area, and that was corroborated by virtue of the township traffic engineer, who did review and offer a review letter. And to my knowledge, there was nothing in that letter that questioned the study area, either in the letter or subsequent to the issuance of the letter. So I hope that answers your question.
So you made a bunch of assumptions in order to design this plan.
I would characterize my earlier answer to your question not as assumptions. I pointed out that there were level service investigations that were done at the closest intersections, and we found that the impact of the site at the closest intersections were in most cases not measurable, and in only a few cases, a very, very small increase in delay on the order of 1 added second. I then explained that as I got further away, or as one gets further away from the site, the notion of trip distribution reduces traffic further, which means that subsequent downstream intersections will have even less impact. And that is how I based my decision-making for the study area.
Do you think another engineer would come up with a different result?
Well,
and
it's
maybe widen the scope to include several other intersections, especially actually on Old Eagle and Stratford.
So it's hard to get into the mind of another engineer, but what I can tell you to assuage your concerns is that I know of at least one other traffic engineer, namely the township traffic engineer, who reviewed this and offered no comment on the inadequacy of the study area. So I believe the study area was well-defined and probably did not need to include any other intersections, including the one that you just mentioned at Old Eagle School, which technically is not even in Radnor Township.
Well, that has nothing to do with the holistic approach to a scientific study.
Well, I'm not here talking about a holistic approach to a scientific study. I'm here talking about the conditional use hearing in Radnor Township.
So it's limited. So you just said it's limited.
Objection, that's not his testimony.
Well, that's what I heard, Daniel. I hope everyone else heard it as well, especially the Board of Commissioners.
Yeah, I object.
Any more questions, Mr. Gato?
No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Batt, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Hoyle, any questions? Mr. Hoyle?
You know, I'm an idiot. I use Zoom all day long and I still can't figure it out 8 o'clock at night. I apologize. And this is completely non-combative,
It happens all the time, believe me.
Mr. Tavani testified that he doesn't see any increase in unsafe foot traffic. I'm just wondering if he has walked at night from the development area in question to the train station in the dark.
No.
Okay. Are you aware of any sidewalks?
I'm aware of sidewalks proposed by the applicant along its frontage.
But what about from the intersection of Grant and Hedgerow to the train station?
I believe there are only limited opportunities where sidewalks exist there.
Yeah, it's and do you know how wide the road is there? And is there any curves or blind spots on that road?
There is horizontal curvature on the road, yes.
Horizontal meaning it's an S turn, correct?
Yes, meaning it's a turn that is not vertical.
Which you can't have a vertical turn, right? That would go up in space.
Traffic engineers and roadway designers use the terminology vertical curve to describe things like crests and sags in roadways.
Got you. Okay, I understand. So there's but there is a blind S curve, and pedestrians walking from the development will have to navigate that without sidewalks to get to the train station in question. So I just wanted to ask, so that you think that's okay, and that the traffic is not going to increase and cause any danger to pedestrians that are using that roadway.
The site as contemplated is not going to change the pedestrian experience as it currently exists between the boundary of the site and the existing train station.
Good answer. And then question, you said 27 peak cars from the site. How many cars travel across the site during that peak time? So is it 27 out of 100, 27 out of 50, 27 out of 3,000?
During peak hours, it's approximately 300 in both directions.
Okay, so 27 out of 300. And then if the township property line was different by 100 yards, do you think that the township engineer for Radnor would have asked to contemplate the Old Eagle Stratford intersection?
I don't know. As I explained, I chose the two intersections closest to the site, the two public intersections closest to the site. The one to the west that's closest is Grant and Hedgerow.
Yes.
At that location, the level of service impact was virtually imperceptible. So as one continues further away from the site, that will logically continue. That impact will continue to be small, perhaps imperceptible. As you get to further distanced intersections, which have greater underlying or existing traffic volumes, that only serves to diminish the impact of the site. In other words, if the next downstream intersection has hypothetically 1,000 vehicles per hour traveling through it versus say 300, then the impact of 10 or 15 cars at the busier intersection is going to be even more remote, smaller than at the 300 vehicle intersection.
I see what you're saying, except that, and I guess I'm not allowed to testify, except to say that that intersection is very, very different than the two intersections that you studied, Mr. Tavani. The Old Eagle and Stratford intersection is it's a polar opposite from the two that you studied. But
do you agree, Mr. Tavani? Here's the question. You agree?
I'm not really sure how he's characterizing it. If he's talking about signal controls, I would say that's probably a faulty assumption. They're both unsignalized side street stop controlled intersections.
No, Stratford and Old Eagle does not. Well, Old Eagle does not have a stop sign. Like the other one has the other one's a four-way stop. Frank, do you agree with that? And Old Eagle and Stratford is not a four-way stop?
So, Mr. Hoyle, to protect the integrity of the court reporter's duties, I'm going to refrain from answering your questions quickly or talking over you. I would hope
I apologize.
You would afford the same. The intersection of Eagle and Stratford is all-way stop controlled. It has stop signs on all four approaches. The intersection of Stratford and Grant/Hedgerow is side street stop controlled. There are just stop signs on the minor street approaches. Old Eagle and Stratford also only has stop signs on the minor street approaches. So I would characterize them both as having similar traffic controls and not polar opposites in that regard. If, however, your statement is meant to characterize the differences in traffic volumes, your statement may be correct, but since I did not count it, I do not know exactly how much traffic is going through that intersection in Tredyffrin Township.
Okay, and to clarify what you just said, because the Stratford Grant Hedgerow intersection is a four-way stop, which I don't, right? And the Eagle Stratford is also a four-way stop with a blinking red light. But the Stratford Old Eagle, which was not in the study, but all of us live there, is very different. It does not have and it also has a vertical. I now know a new word. Thank you. It also has a vertical bad sight lines.
I'm not sure if there was a question there, but perhaps.
Well, I was just clarifying what you said, because you said that you made a point that the intersections were alike. And I'm just saying that I'm just asking,
Do you agree, Mr. Tavani?
Could you please restate the question?
Is the intersection of Grant Lane and Stratford Avenue similar in traffic pattern, density, and safety as the intersection of Stratford Avenue and Old Eagle School Road?
I do not know, since I did not study the intersection of Stratford and Old Eagle School Road.
Exactly.
Anything else, Mr. Hoyle?
I guess not. It's easy to, if you don't study, I guess you can't comment on it. So thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Rushman, any questions for Mr. Tavani?
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Tavani, I think we're having a little bit of a stress here because this does impact all the way into the development. Have you done any study or taken into account any factor related to train traffic when a train comes in and cars are coming in and out of the train station? Because that does get backed up quite a bit. And in your peak hours, there's a potential where you may not be capturing that. Did you include that in your study at all?
Any peak activity related to arrivals or departures of the trains at the station would by definition be reflected in the traffic count data that was collected in May 2019. So I believe the study reflects those peaking activities as you described.
I would just ask Mr. Howder, I know you've been kind of responsive on some of these things that, there's an ongoing pattern of people asking the same question and the same concern. And while it is not in Radnor, perhaps that's one of those that you can take yourself and consider having a little extra study, because I think we're all expressing a fear that maybe we can alleviate now if we take a look at it, a little differently.
All right, Ms. Rushman, Mr. Howder's not on the witness stand.
Thank you.
So I think he heard you. He's not going to answer you.
That's fine.
You can talk to him outside of this hearing.
Okay.
I'm sure he's available, but
Thank you very much.
anything else for Mr. Tavani?
No, thank you.
Okay, I have one more question. Mr. Rubin, you have a question for Mr. Tavani. You have your hand up, sir.
Yes, my concern, it's Bryn Smythe, is that I'm a walker and I walk on this road daily in the morning and the afternoon. And I live on Hedgerow Lane and I come out, and almost every time I come out of my road, I'm practically knocked over by a car running the stop sign on either side from Radnor Township or from our township of TE. So I'm very concerned about the foot traffic that will be escalated to a high level from this development with no sidewalks coming down to the Stratford train station. And I'm not walking to the Stratford train station, I'm just walking. And I'm really concerned about this. It's a big problem. People obviously also walk their dogs and want to walk their child with a stroller, and it's really hard to do that. And there's lots of pockets of water that are being problematic for people to walk. So I'm really, really concerned about this extra 42 homes going in that people like to drive and walk and be part of their community. And I feel like there's not a lot of concern happening towards the activities that actually go on in a daily lifestyle.
Yeah, Mr. Rice, I would object. I don't hear a question.
Let's try to finish up with questions. There'll be an opportunity to make statements down the road. I know the discussion about the pedestrian traffic triggers concerns, but we want to keep the hearing on track. Do you have any questions for Mr. Tavani? Ms. Smythe?
I'm just concerned. So
I got
it's more of a question, but I'm very concerned about the amount of people coming down the street, either which way. And it's not a specific question more than a major concern.
Mr. Rice, you're muted.
Ms. Johnston, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question? for
Yes.
Mr.
Through all this, is it unusual or normal for the township when you have two townships side by side to go and approach the other township and ask them to participate with you in the study, given the increased traffic that's obviously going to be going down to Old Eagle School Road and Stratford Avenue, which is in a different township?
I think your question was that something that was usual or ordinary?
Or would you do that? Would you consider doing that, approaching the other township and asking them to allow a study at that intersection?
I would not.
Probably closer than North Wayne Avenue.
That would be an unusual outcome.
Ms. Johnston, Tradifferent, I don't believe, has to give permission to the applicant to do a study in Tradifferent. The applicant,
could we do one?
let me finish. The applicant can study whatever intersections, regardless of the municipal boundaries that they choose to study. They've chosen to study what they've done based on their application in front of Radnor, but there's nothing that prevents them from studying an intersection in Tradifferent Township. It's not a question of getting permission from Tradifferent. You may want to notify the police department that you're going to have traffic counters on the road, but I don't think there's a permission involved. Correct, Mr. Tavani?
No, there certainly is no required permission. This would probably be a good opportunity, especially since some of the questions being raised are from people who did not participate in the previous hearing, to reiterate that the applicant's 41 proposed attached homes generates less traffic than a conventional plan of 31 detached homes, which some have characterized as by right. So the proposal before the township is actually to reduce the amount of traffic that would go in and out of this site as compared with a smaller but different type of community, namely the 31 detached homes. Again, that's based strictly on ITE analysis. So the concerns that some residents have with this Tradifferent located intersection or any other intersection in terms of site impacts, keep in mind that the impact is actually less at those intersections with the offered plan as compared to the conventional plan. And again, we are here tonight about use. It's conditional use hearing.
That's really hard to believe.
Well, I understand that you may find that hard to believe, but this is based on the facts that are published by the ITE Trip Generation Manual. This is not my interpretation of that manual. This is no one's interpretation. It's strictly 31.
There you line it up. There's no one probably needs to interpret it, because I don't know if it applies to us.
Objection, we're arguing with the witness now.
Mr. Tavani, I think we're about done.
Thank you.
We can't be arguing with witnesses. I have one more person that has raised their hand. Mr. Shuda, a question, please.
Thanks,
for Mr.
John.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yes.
Shuda.
Mr. Tavani, you mentioned that there were approximately 300 cars during the peak hour that you estimated in your study. Is that correct?
No, I gave an estimation for how much traffic eastbound and westbound there is during a peak hour on Stratford Avenue. In the AM or morning peak, it's approximately 300. In the afternoon, I believe it's closer to 400. And I'm just looking at my own figures and adding several numbers quickly in my head, but that's the ballpark.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, with that, you said east and westbound, they're either going to end up at Old Eagle School Road if they're going west, or they're going to end up at Eagle Road if they're going east. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, that is correct.
Okay. And we add 10% more cars during that. I think you said 27 was the number that anticipated coming out of the development. So you have a 10% roughly increase in the volume of cars. is that considered negligible? Or what number is considered negligible when the increase is occurring? Is it 1%, 10%, 50%?
I understand your question, and since you are being very specific with your percentage calculations, I should offer some clarity of my own. The peak hour traffic activity is different in the morning and in the afternoon. During the morning, it's actually 20 trips, and this is from page 3 of my December report. And during the afternoon, it's 27. So it's actually less than 10% in the morning if we use that 300 number, which again is an approximation. And it's also less than 10% in the afternoon, 27 divided by 400. But to answer your question, the analysis a traffic engineer does isn't just strictly a fractional analysis of site traffic divided by total traffic. We use those volumes as inputs into a rather complicated model, along with other input elements such as traffic control type, signal timings, things of that ilk. And then the model gives an output where it predicts the average delay a motorist will encounter when traveling through a subject intersection. And it even goes so far as to give it a letter grade, not unlike a report card for a student. So you have level of service A and 9 seconds of delay, for example. So what I scientifically demonstrated was that on average, most of the traffic in the area will operate at level of service A and B, and the overall delay is typically 10 seconds or less. And the impact of the site is either nothing, or it's only maybe 1 second of additional delay, which I would submit is a negligible amount of added delay.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Rice, I think you're muted.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shuda. Mr. Rowley, I think that completes that part of the testimony. You have another witness?
I do. I'd like to call Eric Hetzel.
Okay, let's have Mr. Hetzel sworn in.
Do I see Mr. Hetzel?
Yeah, I'm here.
You do solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
And state your name for the record, please.
Eric Hetzel, E-R-I-K-H-E-T-Z-E-L.
Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Hetzel, we're bringing up Exhibit A19. It's on the board now. Is this a copy of your CV?
It is.
And can you briefly describe your professional and educational background?
Yes. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in Geography and Planning from Westchester University and a Master of Regional Planning from the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a professional land planner certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners. My career as a planner spans over 25 years. I've been qualified to testify before numerous boards and commissions regarding the work products that I've prepared, things that include economic, fiscal, and development impact studies, land use studies, development plans, zoning ordinances, and comprehensive plans.
I'd like to offer Mr. Hetzel as an expert in land planning.
Okay, Mr. Hetzel be accepted. Go ahead, Mr. Rowley.
Mr. Hetzel, are you generally familiar with the properties that are subject to this application?
I am.
And did you prepare a fiscal impact analysis for this application?
I did.
And before we go into the specifics of your analysis, do you prepare similar fiscal impact analyses for potential projects for both developers and municipal authorities?
Prepare them for all manner of clients, including private landowners, public organizations, and the like.
And can you describe the process for analyzing developments such as the one we're proposing today?
Yes, I review the plans for a project and analyze many different factors, including the number of units, the number of bedrooms per unit, the types of units they are, their market prices that they're anticipated to sell for. I look at market dynamics in the surrounding area. I examine township and school district budget documents. I review the applicable tax regulations that govern how these properties are taxed. And I use all of these factors to anticipate future annual fiscal impacts related to a project.
And are those methods you described commonly accepted practices in your field?
They're commonly accepted practices in the planning field. I use a methodology called that's known in the field as the Rutgers method. It's developed by the Rutgers University Center for Urban Policy Research, and it was originally published in a book called The New Practitioner's Guide to Fiscal Analysis, and it was further developed in a later publication by the same authors entitled The Development Impact Assessment Handbook.
And a copy of your fiscal impact analysis is included in exhibit. It was included in our application submission and also included at exhibit A2AA. But I'd like to turn to exhibit A20. Is this a copy of the last page of your fiscal impact analysis report, which summarizes the findings of your analysis?
Yes, it is.
And can you please describe the fiscal impact analysis you performed?
Okay, this is a summary, and it breaks out the summary of the development itself in the first first 6 lines, beginning with residential units down to the population impacts. That is a characterization of the development number of units, 41 units. We assumed a market value of $850,000 per unit, which translates to a market value of $34.85 million for the entire development. We then apply the county common level ratio to arrive at an assessed value in Delaware County. When this report was prepared, the assessed values tracked at approximately 50% of market value. We used demographic multipliers that were published by the Rutgers University Center for Urban Policy Research that are specific to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and to the bedroom mix and unit types that are proposed here. We're assuming 41 3-bedroom, single-family attached townhouse units. And those multipliers yielded a total population in this 41 unit development of 91 persons, 9 of which are school-aged children without regard for where they attend school. So public school and private school kids were not broken out. It's just school-aged children. Moving down the summary table, the next section that's captioned Radnor Township lists the various revenue sources as cataloged in the township budget. Real estate tax revenues, non-property tax revenues, which includes things like licenses, fees, fines, permits, things of the like. Real estate transfer tax, which is incorrectly noted on the table. It's actually levied at 1% to the township, not 0.5%. That's a typo. And then we total up all the revenues that occur on an annual basis in the total line, which is indicated as $119,045. We subtract out the projected costs that the development will incur in terms of public services. And that is based on per capita cost numbers that I've derived from the township budget for residential land uses in the most recent budget year. Based on the characteristics of this development, we project annual costs of $84,604 we believe that that's conservative because we looked at all general fund expenses. We didn't apply any discounts for things, for services that the township would not provide to this development. Private services, for instance, for maintenance and upkeep and snow removal and the like. And we come to a net annual township fiscal impact that is positive at over $34,000 a year, where revenues from taxes and other sources exceed costs by that amount. We further do a similar analysis for the school district, again, looking at their budget, their tax rates, other sources of revenue, including intergovernmental sources, funding from the state and federal sources. And we project annual revenues of $498,196. Again, subtracting out expenditures, cost to the school district, which again is based on cost per student. Those 9 students, we assumed a cost based on the existing budget of the school district of $24,082 per student. Multiplying that out by the 9 students, you'll arrive at that cost number there. Subtracting the costs from the revenues, again, we project a positive fiscal impact at the end of the day, or on an annual basis, of $281,455. Adding the 2 net positives up at the bottom, the township plus the school district, the community would experience $315,895 in positive net impact on an annual basis.
And you touched on this briefly in your discussion there, but were you conservative in your assumptions in your analysis?
We were. We were conservative in the value per unit that we included here at $850,000 per unit. We believe that will be higher based on some of the surrounding market comparables. It could be as high as $1 million per unit or more, based on, if you look at Villa Stratford as an example, I think units in there are, many of them are 3-bedroom units as well, and sell for more than that. So we felt that if we can come in demonstrating that this will not have a negative fiscal impact at that value, it would only be more positive as the value increased. Similarly, for the school-age children estimate, we use as I mentioned, the Rutgers number. We did some research. I was unable to talk to anybody at the school district about what numbers they use in their enrollment projections, and I could find nothing on their website talking about how the enrollment projections are done at Radnor Township School District. But there are other sources that we look at to see how school districts come to these numbers. Anecdotally, I found an enrollment projections report from the neighboring Tredyffrin Easttown School District that they also use the Rutgers numbers, same ones that we use, except they use a different column. They use the one specifically for public school age children, which is an even lower multiplier than we used. So in that regard, we're more conservative than a neighboring school district in their enrollment projections. And incidentally, also in that study was referenced a set of multipliers that were produced by eConsult Solutions, a local economics projecting and forecasting company. And that company developed a set of multipliers based on newer and more locally specific data, specifically the townships in this area and the school districts in this area of southeastern Pennsylvania, as recently, I believe, as within the past decade. And their numbers for this type of development come in even with even lower numbers of school-age kids per residential unit. So we feel confident that our estimate is conservative and valid.
And in your professional opinion, would the proposed development have any greater fiscal impacts on the township or the township school district than a typical development with similar characteristics?
No.
That's all the questions I have on direct.
Mr. Rice,
Yes.
I wonder if this might be a good time for a short break.
Okay. Now 50. Is 5 minutes enough?
That's
Norma?
fine. Yes, it is. Mhm.
Okay, let's come back at 8:55 then, and we'll start with the any questions from the parties for Mr. Hetzel.
Thank you, Norma.
Thank you.
Wait, John, what
Yes.
is the parties first, or what about the commissioners?
I mean, the commissioners can certainly go before the parties.
Oh, I didn't know. That's just the way it seemed like we had done it before. So
Okay, well, let's just start, because the commissioners have been sitting there quietly for 2.5 hours. So we'll come back and the
Hard to
commission.
do.
What's that? Let's come back with the commissioners at when we come back in 5 minutes, and we'll start there. Okay?
So this is the last witness being brought.
I believe so. Mr. Rowley, is that correct?
Yeah, we will reserve the right to bring, rebuttal witnesses potentially, but this is the last witness we have in our case in chief.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll come back, and I think Commissioner Abel, I think you're going to be up when we come back to ask questions, followed by Commissioner Mulroney and then Borowski. So 5 minutes, we'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking for Commissioner Booker and Larkin. Not sure whether they're back on or not.
You've got me, John.
Okay. And, okay, so we're on questions for Mr. Hetzel and the rotation that we started over the last couple nights. We'd start with Commissioner Abel. Do you have any questions for Mr. Hetzel? Jake?
John, I do not.
Okay. Commissioner Mulroney, any questions for Mr. Hetzel?
I have a question.
You got to wait your turn, Commissioner Booker. Hold on. We're Commissioner Mulroney, you're muted. Do you have any questions? Okay, let's try Commissioner Borowski. Any questions?
Okay. Yes, I do have some questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Rice. Good evening, Mr. Hetzel. Nice to see you again. I think we just saw you last week, did we not? I just have two very quick questions. So with regards to the school-age children, so you're estimating that there are only going to be 9 school-age children in this property. I realize that that's only an estimate, but I believe, if I'm correct, they're estimating 47 homes in there. Am I right? Is that
41?
41, okay. So 41 homes, only 9 children. And I think earlier this evening, somebody testified that they're still not even sure how many bedrooms they're gonna have or things like that. Am I correct in that?
I think you are correct, but I don't want to speak for them. I was instructed to model a 3-bedroom development.
Okay, so you only modeled a 3-bedroom development, although I think earlier this evening, and I know you don't know the answer to this, but I think earlier this evening we heard they're still kind of up in the air as to how many bedrooms and whatnot.
If I may add, I did in anticipation that there could be 4 bedrooms. I did model it on the basis of 4 bedrooms as well.
Okay, and
the
what would that look like?
The impact is still positive, but there are more children in a 4-bedroom configuration. There would be 26 school-age children, which is on a multiplier of 0.64 school-age children per dwelling unit.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, because 9 for 41 seemed a little low to me, but thank you for that clarity around the 3 bedrooms and versus the 4. So the other question I have, so you said that was a conservative, at least the 9 for 3 was conservative. Were you, and you said you weren't able to get, I guess, the projections, student body projections from the school district. Were you able to contact somebody at the school district? Because I know that those projections, and they may have been done more recently, but I know they were done at least 6 years ago when they implemented full day kindergarten, because it was, everybody wanted to know what the impact on the elementary schools was going to be around that. Is it that you weren't able to get to anyone at the school district, or?
That's correct. I was not able to connect with anybody.
Okay, so they weren't responsive, or?
No.
Okay, okay. All right. And I guess it would not be I guess this would not be an appropriate question for me since you technically didn't model it, but based on the information that you did model, is there a way to project and say what that might look like if what the school-age children would look like if they did end up making some of them 5 bedrooms as well? Or do you just model for the entire unit? Everything is 3 bedrooms, everything is 4 bedrooms. Like, is that how you work it?
It's possible to break it out and say there's 50% 3-bedroom, 50% 4-bedroom. I don't know that I have multipliers for 5-bedroom townhouses. I'm not sure they exist. Any large numbers where the data set would be significant.
Okay, but so the 9 is purely based on all of them being 3-bedroom, and then the 26 that you mentioned is all of them being 4-bedroom.
Correct.
Okay.
And the proposal is not, would never be to be 5 bedrooms here. It would be, right now it's 3. I looked at 4 just anticipating the question, but the proposal right now is 3 as I know it.
Okay. All right. Those are my only questions, but I would ask if you were able to connect with somebody at the school district, do you feel like your estimates might be a little bit more, maybe not as much of an estimate, you would have some real data to plug in there?
I don't think so. I think the multipliers I use are the best that I know and the most reliable. I would expect that they probably use the same or similar demographic multipliers than I use in my analysis. And until I would talk to them, I can't know their thinking.
Okay. All right. All right, great. Thank you very much. Those are my only questions.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Mulroney, any questions for this witness?
No, I think Commissioner Borowski covered everything I was thinking of. Thank you. Nice job,
Okay.
Lisa.
Thank you. Commissioner Booker.
Can I go before Rich? Because I just have a few questions, Rich.
Sure. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Hetzel, can you put that sheet back up on the board? Share that sheet.
Good thing. Byrne, could you please? Thank you.
Okay. So I just have a couple quick questions. So the net school impact is what you have at 281. It would be different if it's if there are 4 bedrooms per townhouse. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Are you aware that there's overcrowding in pretty much all of Radnor schools at this point?
I'm not aware.
Okay. So that number could be wrong, because if you add 9 kids or 26 kids, you're looking at additional classrooms, possibly trailers. Now, I know that they're not all going to go to the same school, but are you aware that there is overcrowding and we're over the limit to begin with? That could actually be a net loss if you have to have a trailer, or even worse, you're dealing in the millions of having to build a new school.
I'm not projecting capital expenses here. These are annual impacts based on the cost to educate the students that come out of this development. How those students are accommodated in schools was not part of the scope of this.
Well, so I guess my question is you look at from the Radnor Township side, where you talk about fines and fees and et cetera. So you'll look at it on a revenue side for the township, as you stated, but you won't look at it on an expense side for the school district?
I did look at it on the expense side, and these are annual impacts.
So again, that could be an annual impact that you just of having to put a trailer or build a new school that you didn't look at. Am I correct?
It's not an annual impact. That's a one-time impact.
No, it would be an annual impact if you're going to have more kids. It's going to be an annual. I don't see that your math there is correct, or I'll let you explain it to me. How would that be just an annual impact if you have a child going to a township school for maybe 13 years?
Your statements are based on speculation. My statements in my report are based on the facts as they exist today.
So there are no facts, because you're speculating anywhere between 9 to 26 children. So So that's speculation based on what you're saying. So I'm not speculating anything. I'm saying it's a fact, and I'm not trying to be argumentative here, but I do object to what you're saying. It's a fact that the schools are overcrowded, as I've stated, and it's a fact that there could be additional revenues that, and you even said yourself that you have not spoken to members of the school district. How are you accounting for this and those numbers? Don't you think that they could be well off and actually in the negative?
Well, any one student coming from any one house in the entire district could be the tipping point. What we're trying to demonstrate here is that, comparatively speaking, that this type of development at this site is producing a relatively small number of students contributing to that pool.
26 students is not a small number, and even if they all don't go to Radnor, school students still use Radnor's buses. So if 26 students potentially is a small number, what is considered a large number? What is that tipping point number?
I don't know that I'm prepared to say what a large number would be. I'm saying that 26, in my opinion, out of 41 homes is a relatively minor impact, especially when it can show that on an annual basis, revenues exceed costs to the school district.
Okay, and that's a speculative answer, correct? Because that's your opinion, speculation.
It's based on the budgets that I have available to me today.
But you haven't spoken to the members of the school board. I'm trying to absorb this, and you stated that you haven't spoken to members of the school board, but that's a small number. How can you reconcile that that's actually the case?
I guess I can't. That's right. You can make your own speculation there.
Thank you. And it's a view is thank you. Nothing further.
Commissioner Booker.
Yes, Mr. Hetzel, you indicated that this is annual revenues in your testimony. I note that you're showing township revenues, including real estate transfer tax, which is a one-time event for these purposes. So it's really not an annual ongoing revenue to include. So this is only a one-time projection, not an annual projection, correct?
No, because houses sell every year. We assume that 5% of the development would sell each year once it's up and running.
So is that number 15,421 the 5% number, or is that the number for all of the 41 homes for the first year?
That's the 5% number on an annual basis. The first year transfer taxes would be on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And that's not included in this?
Not included in the annual impact. It's not. That's a one-time thing.
So based on this analysis, we should, the township should always be building townhomes, I guess, because it's better for the township to have higher density. It's always beneficial then.
That's a planning decision for the township. I'm just characterizing this proposed development in this report.
So again, have you done the analysis for the by right plan of 30 single family homes?
I have.
And can you show that?
Yeah. That analysis comes up with 109 new persons living there, 32 of which are school age children. That's 31. This is a 31 unit plan. And the impact to the township is lower, but still positive at $7,725 per year. And the impact to the school district is negative in the order of $217,000 roughly per year.
So 30 single family homes cost more to the township and school district than 41 townhomes. And again, you've given us a 3-bedroom analysis rather than the 4-bedroom, but again, it seems to be to strain credulity that townhomes have less of an impact on the infrastructure and cost of the municipality than the single-family homes. Do you have those figures that we could take a look at?
Which ones?
For the single family you just referred to, you read off some numbers. Can you post that?
Yeah, I can, I defer to my client on that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
If we want to talk about the impact between the two product types, sure. I mean, it's accepted across the country that single family developments produce more school children than townhome developments.
Well, let's just let's do this because, sir, you're not on the witness stand. I think that Mr. Hetzel had a written document that showed his analysis. Mr. Hetzel, can you submit that to the township? We'll mark that as an exhibit. Mr. Raleigh, do you have copies of that we can distribute to the board after tonight?
For the 31 unit?
Yes.
I don't believe a report or an analysis was prepared, a written report. I believe just numbers were run. Is that correct, Eric?
That is correct.
So there's not a physical report to submit.
Okay. I thought Mr. Hetzel was reading from some kind of a document. So you have some rough numbers, Mr. Hetzel? Is that all you're reading from?
That's right. I just have a summary table without a supporting. I never elevated to the level of a submitted report.
Well, you could still submit that in writing, though. So you testified from it. It's in writing. So submit, to the township, Mr. Raleigh, submit whatever he's reading from. Just mark it. We'll mark it as your next exhibit, and the board can use that in their deliberations. I don't see any.
And I'd also request the 4-bedroom townhouse analysis as well. And
well, I don't know what that is, Commissioner Booker. Let's do this one thing at a time.
Well, okay, I'll just remind you, Commissioner Borowski just referred to a 4-bedroom townhouse analysis. What Mr. Hetzel testified to was that this was based on 3 bedrooms per townhome. Lisa asked, what if it was 4? And he said that the number of children that would be at the schools was 27 or 28, not 26. The 9 that's provided here. 26. I'm asking for the 4-bedroom analysis to which he referred in the last piece of testimony based on questions from Commissioner Borowski.
Is there a written document that shows for 4-bedroom, total 4-bedroom townhomes, all of them 4-bedroom, there'll be 26 school-age children? Is there a written document that says that?
Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those were preliminary numbers that were run. And I just want to get back to the conditional use standards in this case are that we have to meet the conditional use standards under the code. We've submitted this fiscal impact study, which is our analysis of the fiscal impacts that is required to be submitted under the conditional use requirements under the code. To require further submission of reports for a 31 unit, we're trying to illustrate by having the 31 unit, we're trying to illustrate that this is a more beneficial project in terms of the fiscal impacts to the township, but that's not the standard. The standard is that we meet the conditional use standards as outlined by code, and then it goes to the objectors to show that our project has greater detrimental impacts than a similar 41 unit townhome development. So,
but Attorney Raleigh, your witness testified to these statement. So
Commissioner Booker,
you brought that into evidence. I'm asking to see the evidence that you and your witness brought into the proceeding.
Commissioner Booker, let me argue with Mr. Raleigh. You don't need to argue with Mr. Raleigh. Let me ask Mr. Raleigh. Mr. Raleigh, no one's asking Mr. Hetzel to do another study. What is being asked is for him to submit whatever he's reading from, if he has a written document, which apparently he does for this most recent testimony, and if he has a written document for the total four-bedroom townhome development, if he has something like that, if he doesn't have that, then tell us that. But if he has something in writing, submit it. And if he chooses not to submit it, then the board can take that under advisement also. But he's testified to it. He's reading from it. He's on the witness stand. I think at least what he read from tonight, the board's entitled to have a copy of that. Not to do another study, just to have that submitted. So I don't think now's the time to argue it. It's something that you can submit after tonight. If you have an objection to it, make the objection then, and then the board will consider that. Why that wouldn't be submitted. But he's reading from something tonight. That certainly is a document that could be marked and admitted into this hearing. So, Commissioner Booker, you're still asking questions. So let's ask some more questions of this witness, Mr. Hetzel, if you have them, and then we'll see if we get these other documents after the hearing tonight to be made part of the record. Go ahead, Commissioner Booker.
Mr. Hetzel, you testified that you're relying on facts. These are facts. What are the facts that you're relying on for your data here? In the traffic study, we were based it on ITE traffic studies, which is transportation engineers. I would submit that's not a fact. That's merely data that's compiled for use. They're not facts. They're just data that can be extrapolated. Do you have, and what's the standards that you're using that you're claiming are facts for the number of students and other data that you're using?
I would say the facts I rely upon are what we know to be the number of units and the anticipated selling price of those units. The tax rates of the township and school district are facts. The amount of money that the township and school district spend on an annual basis to provide services are facts. The multipliers that I use to establish or estimate population impacts are based on factual studies, but are compiled as data products that have been accepted in the planning field within a reasonable degree of professional certainty.
Well, they're estimates. They're not facts. They are data points that are used to extrapolate and make estimates.
You can,
correct?
If you can find,
it's misconstruing the testimony.
That's not misconstruing the testimony.
Commissioner Booker, let's just ask him some questions.
So here's a question then. Did you look at a similar development nearby with 40 townhomes and look at the actual costs and comparables and compare it to this proposed development? And if so, which development did you use to compare it to?
I did not, and that was not what I was tasked to do. I was tasked to do a fiscal impact analysis.
All right, no further questions. Thank you.
Can he finish his answer?
You done, Mr.
Yeah,
Hetzel?
he answered. He said no, he didn't do it. Appreciate no further questions.
I believe he was cut off in the middle of the answer.
Mr. Hetzel, do you have anything else to add?
I would like to add that I was using a methodology that is universally accepted in planning, in the planning profession, which is the Rutgers University method, per capita costing method. It's meant to provide an order of magnitude of impacts that you can use in comparing the impacts among development types.
again, an order of magnitude, that's not an exact, that's an estimate, and these are
Objection.
these are
Commissioner
these are
Booker.
estimates. These you can't say that these are exact.
Commissioner
And
Booker.
again,
Commissioner, Mr. Raleigh, you have a continuing objection to, you don't have to do that. To Mr. Commissioner Booker being argumentative. You just, okay? So you don't have to do that anymore.
I'm merely making the point that these
Commissioner
are all
Booker,
estimates, these are projections.
I understand it. Commissioner Larkin, you're up next. Do you have any questions?
I do, thank you. Does your estimate of 91 residents include children, or are the 9 children additional?
It includes children.
Okay, so there would be then, I guess 9 houses with 3 people each is 27, and the remaining houses would have 2 people each, if I'm doing the math right?
I didn't get to any sort of level of who lives in what houses and how many people. I just have overall multipliers. I have from Rutgers, in a 3-bedroom, single-family attached unit, it estimates that there are 2.22 persons living per unit. Some houses may have 1 person, other houses may have 3. Same with the school-age children. The multiplier is 0.21 school-age children per unit. That doesn't mean adult children living there. It means children of school age.
Okay, when you say school age, does that include children under 5?
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
When you say school age children, does that include children under 5?
No, it's essentially 5, the age cohort's 5 through, I believe, 18.
So if there are children under 5, where are they accounted for in your model?
In the total residential population.
Okay. As I get it, I do actually see 9 houses of 3 each, and the remainder of the homes have 2 people in them each. Or you could, of that remaining population, you end up with 3 people in one and 1 person in another. So you can move the numbers around a little bit. Where do those children under 5 come in? You're going to have maybe, I guess, 2 parents and a child under 5 in one home. There's another house that, by definition, in your model only has a single occupant.
I don't get to that level of granularity in this. I just look at total population and school age children based on a set of data that's produced by an academic and professional consortium.
Okay. What variables are incorporated into the model that's created by that academic and professional consortium?
In terms of estimating population?
Yeah, what are the variables that you plug into the equation?
I don't plug any variables in. I just consult a table that says it lists by unit type. We have single family detached, single family attached, townhome type units, apartment rental units, units in buildings that are more than 5 units that are owned. So it goes by unit type and then by number of bedrooms, 1, 2, 3, 4. In the case of some of the single family, they may have data for 5-bedroom units.
So you finish.
I'm sorry?
I said you finish. I interrupted you. I didn't mean to. You finish.
So in the case of this, I looked at the table that said this is specific to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that was derived from some set of data that Rutgers University compiled. And they established that in a 3-bedroom, single-family attached dwelling unit, there are 2.22 people living there. Similarly, they estimate that there are 0.21 school-aged children living there, of which some may attend private schools. I did not make any deduction for that. They have a separate multiplier in their tables for public school-aged children, which is a lower multiplier than the one that I used. So I used the conservative, in the interest of being conservative, I used the higher number.
Okay, so I asked you what variables you plugged in, and first you said you didn't plug in any, but then you gave me what I think might have been what I meant. When I say the variables you plug in, what I mean to say is what data goes into your calculation. I heard you say unit type and number of bedrooms. Is there anything else that would be a variable in the equation or a line on the chart or however you want to characterize it?
They would use values as well. It's hard to use values as listed in the chart because it's from it's supposed to cover the entire state of Pennsylvania. I would suggest to say that the units we're looking at here are fairly high-priced units among those that are in the classification of range of even townhouse units in the general area.
When were the charts last updated? Or rather, a better question would be, when was the chart that you used last updated with respect to value?
June 2006. And I might add that I have consulted other studies to try to validate these numbers and see if they are still valid. Rutgers has not updated this table, but for instance, I consulted a study that was done in Montgomery County by the Montgomery County Planning Commission about, I think in 2012, that estimated that that single-family attached units in Montgomery County, newer units like these, generate 0.21 students per unit. That's based on their independent survey of housing types in Montgomery County. Another study that I referenced that I consulted to validate my numbers was, I mentioned earlier, the Tredeff and Easttown School District enrollment projections from 2019. That was prepared by Sundance Associates. I think I noted that TE uses the Rutgers multipliers for public school age children to do their enrollment projections as a measure of confidence in those numbers. They included a source of multipliers produced by eConsult Solutions that was, and I'm reading from that report, an aggregate of local select geographies representative of the population served by the TE school district. And the values there came in even lower than the Rutgers multipliers. And they cite several examples for that. They say that newer housing tends to have fewer school-age kids than the older housing stock where people are moving in with more kids, and that the built-in survival rates portion of earlier housing adds more students than new housing. And I would also suggest that the lifestyle choice of people living in the proposed development is one of likely to be smaller family units than would be in other housing in the township.
What makes you say that?
It's borne out in these studies, the one I just cited.
So
the Montgomery County study and the eConsult study.
No, I'm sorry. You concluded your testimony just now, your answer, by telling me that you thought that the lifestyle choices of people moving into this particular development would include fewer children, as I understood you, which maybe you'll correct me. My question is, why is it true that this development in particular, as opposed to a comparable townhome development elsewhere, would attract largely childless families?
I would say I base it on anecdotal planning data. I don't have a quantified number for that. But in my opinion as a planner, what I've seen in terms of the occupants of different kinds of housing, that is anecdotal information that I'm relying on as a planner.
Okay, to be clear for us, is that a statement to which you are willing to testify to within a reasonable degree of professional certainty? Specifically the anecdotal evidence about this development, not the remainder of the information about the modeling that you've been talking about.
Well, I mentioned it's anecdotal. That's the level to which I'm testifying on that point. But I can say anecdotally, this type of development doesn't permit play sets in the yards. The recreational amenities are not attractive generally to to households with large families of children. The price point is going to be well over $1 million, most likely at the end of the day. Again, not a price point that is attractive to families with many children in the household in general.
I'm going to offer an editorial comment and say that millionaires like sex and children too. So I'm not sure that I'm willing to buy that, but I'm going to ask you again, because I want to hold your feet to the fire a little bit on this, because we have to make a decision. Are you willing to testify to within a reasonable degree of professional certainty that this development in particular, as distinct from the other model-based information that you have testified to, will attract a class of resident that has fewer children on average than the model would predict?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what I did model was using the multipliers that were available to me. I didn't speculate and run a model that says, well, I think it's only going to have half that number of students. I used what I had available to me that was published for this type of housing, and that's what I presented here.
Got it. Let me talk to you about the age of the data. You've presented in your testimony so far some impressive credentials for how others are accepting that data. And I think that what you were telling us was that it had been validated by additional studies that have been done. My question for you is, we've just gone through a reassessment. My home was reassessed and is now at 5 times its prior value. From the emails I'm getting, that's true for many residents. The reassessment is just 20 years old. From 2006 until now, an $850,000 house back then is very different from an $850,000 house today. What is your confidence in the data that you are relying on here with respect to unit value?
I came in at what I estimated to be a lower value per unit than is likely to be developed here.
What value did you use?
$850,000 per unit. Now, if you were to say these are not $850,000 houses, they are higher value houses, that doesn't change my outcome for the number of people or school-age children living there. What it does change is the tax revenues that you'll be collecting will be higher.
You said 850,000 is the lower dollar figure that you used. What is the number that you anticipate the average unit will sell for?
I'd have to defer to the applicant in their marketing of that. I can say that looking around the township, what I would consider to be similar, I didn't do a comparable study, but what I would consider to be similar types of homes, specifically Villa Stratford, shows consistently higher market values than 850,000.
And again, if I could just interject on a price point, if it's helpful.
I'd like you to pause, Mr. Howder, because I do want to finish some questions with this witness before, frankly, he gets some help. But then I do want to hear what you have to say.
Let's have Mr. Howder sworn in if he's going to keep testifying. Next time there's an availability for you to, we're going to have you sworn in, Mr. Howder. Go ahead.
I've been sworn.
Commissioner Larkin, go ahead.
Mr. Hetzel, how are you able to testify that $850,000 is well, strike that. Let me ask a different question. How are you able to quantify how much lower $850,000 is than the ultimate selling dollar figure if you don't know what the ultimate selling dollar figure is?
I'm not attempting to quantify that. I'm merely presenting an impact on what I believe to be a lower number than it will actually sell for. And I'm still able to, through my numbers, demonstrate that the revenues from the proposed development will exceed costs on an annual basis.
Got it. When I started this line, the point that I was trying to get at is that the dollar figures in the 2006 survey, the 2006 model that you used, are, I assume, based on the general trajectory of housing prices throughout the United States, considerably lower than what comparable houses would sell for today, as a result of which an $850,000 house today would very possibly have been a $500,000 or $400,000 house in 2006, or depending on the area, a $100,000 house or a $900,000 house. I don't know. So my question to you is, was there any adjustment that you were able to make for housing prices today using a 2006 model?
No, I don't think it's the dollar value of the house that matters, but rather where it falls in the classification of other houses of the same bedroom mix. For instance, I'm looking at the Rutgers numbers now, and they have three classes of numbers for single family attached 3 bedrooms in terms of cost. So you have less than 165,500. You'll have a range of 165.5 to 205.5, and then those that are more than 205,500. I think it's pretty easy to say, if you were to apply the consumer pricing index and escalate that $205,000 number, that it would accurately represent the class of home that this falls into in that three range description.
Okay, so everything over, you said 205?
Yep.
Everything over 205 is just lumped into the same category?
Right.
Okay.
It's the highest price category in that study.
Got it.
The state of Pennsylvania, not the United States.
Got it. That makes some sense. You said that this model was compiled using some set of data that Rutgers used. Do you know if it's based on data taken from the United States or just the Commonwealth?
They've done it for, I think, every state, and they've done it also for the entire United States. The set that I'm using is just the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Got it. Is there any model that looks at just Radnor Township, or is anyone able to create such a model for us?
That's beyond the purview of this analysis. I would rely on current public use microdata samples from the US Census in order to do that. As I mentioned, I found where eConsult Solutions had done just that. The Tredeffen East, or they had done just that, and they were referenced in the TE school district enrollment report. And that was based on a much more locally specific geography. The municipalities that constitute or contribute to the school district in Tredeffen Easttown, which I would suggest is similar in many ways from a socioeconomic standpoint to Radnor Township. And the numbers consistently came out lower using the locally specific data from, I'm guessing 2019 or thereabouts.
You mentioned Villa Stratford. Did you inquire into the student age population in Villa Stratford?
I have not yet, and I have not been able to reach anybody at the school district to find out how many students they will bus from that location, if they would even divulge that information to me.
Okay. Does your model adjust for the quality of the school district in any way?
It does not. It's, as I mentioned, it's based on the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But I point back to the eConsult numbers that are local in nature, and I think that they reflect that TE is a very good school district, as is Radnor, among the perceptions of people moving in, and it certainly drives people's decisions as to where they move to. But I'm not sure that they would move into a house at this price point when there are many more housing available in the district for other alternatives.
Okay. Those are all the questions that I have. Thank you very much.
Okay. Commissioner Mulroney had a question. for the witness. Commissioner Mulroney. Okay. While we're waiting for Commissioner Mulroney, Mr. Howder, you said you're already sworn in. I think you were going to clarify the price point, the marketing of these units. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was just trying to offer some practical input to try to diffuse the conversation. I think these are going to be marketed well above $1 million. My guess is that the actual selling price points will be somewhere in the $1.2 million range, even as high as $1.5 million. And I think that's based on, well, I think it's just based on what they'll be offered at, and I think it's supported by the market. We asked Mr. Hetzel to model it the way he did, to be ultra conservative by using an $850,000 number, just to avoid getting into a discussion about whether the intended price point was right or not. But I think if you overlay that into the model, what we intend to go out to the market with price point wise, obviously the math changes. It also, by raising that price point, I think the point is that it puts you in competition with a lot of other housing stock in the township, much of which I think our view is, and it's supported by the studies that Mr. Hetzel referenced, is much more amenable to families with school children, single family homes. So it just opens up a wider array of homes that would come into that price point as it goes up. And then obviously, just to reiterate, the quality of the school district is undeniable, but the demographic also means that private schools have a large impact on student populations. And, you know, obviously Mr. Hetzel's numbers, if it's 9 or 26 or somewhere in between, don't discount the fact that a third of those kids, or half, or some number, could go to private schools.
Thank you, Mr. Howder. So the commissioner questions, does Commissioner Mulroney have a question for this witness? All right.
Sorry, I apologize. I had to step away for just a minute, but I do have a question, and I think it may have been answered in my absence, and if so, I just have the one, which is going back to what Commissioner Larkin was asking about the data that you have used to come to your conclusions. Does it include things like demographics of the area? So I know that it's done for Pennsylvania. Is it broken down in any way for race, income, adjoining, local home values? I think you did answer. Recent home sales, access to transportation and good schools and things that home buyers look for. Do those plug into your data as well?
No, except, I guess, to the extent that those factors influence the people living in the houses that were used in the data sets used by Rutgers. There were no specific weights given to, specific areas of the state, no specific weights given to proximity of public transit or race, income, socioeconomic status, any of that. It's all just based on the data set that Rutgers used that they felt, I would assume, are representative of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
So are you only skilled in doing this one Rutgers model, or when you do your assessments for your clients, are you typically asked to do sort of a deeper dive into the real culture and values of a community and adjust what the model might say based on some of those elements?
I've never really been asked to do that. The purpose of this analysis is just to show basic annual fiscal impacts associated with a home of a certain value, unit type, and bedroom mix using the set of assumptions that I've presented here tonight.
Okay, in your experience, do things like community values, racial demographics, access to transportation and good schools, do those have any weight or bearing on the fiscal impact to a community?
I suppose they can, but I haven't seen them quantified, and I haven't attempted to quantify that here. To the extent that a house has a certain market value in a certain location of a certain type of house, that speaks to the socioeconomic characteristics of the potential buyer, I would say. They need to earn a certain amount of money in order to buy that house. They make a certain decision about locating to that area to spend a certain amount of money for a house with of a certain configuration, unit type, number of bedrooms. But I haven't weighted any specific items like that in this analysis.
So do you believe that people make decisions on the affordability of a house for them, their own budget based on bedrooms and square footage, or do they also take into account things like schools, transportation, community access to, you know, commercial Main Street, that sort of thing?
I'm sure they do, and that's based on the housing type, the value of the housing that they're looking at, where it's located.
But your model doesn't take any of that into account.
Only to the extent that the values that I'm assuming for the house may indicate the decision-making priorities of the people looking to buy them.
Understood. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. So we have the resident parties. If you have any questions for Mr. Hetzel, I'm going to go through the resident parties, starting with Mr. Shuda. Any questions for Mr. Hetzel?
Yes, I do. Mr. Hetzel, thank you for your information. Regarding the chart you submitted on the 41 attached homes and the 9 school-age children, in the second section, if you put the chart back up, the Radnor Township information, there were Radnor Township expenditures of, I believe, $84,000. Do you know what those expenditures encompass?
Those expenditures encompass everything in the general fund budget, except for capital. I don't think that's a separate. I think that's a separate budget. Services such as public safety, township administration, planning, zoning reviews, everything that's in the general fund budget. None of that was removed in the estimation of this number.
So that is not encompass services of any sort, because from what we were told in some of the testimony earlier in this process, that the likelihood that the HOA would probably have its own trash removal and more than likely its own snow removal, et cetera. So this expenditure of $84,000 does not include any of those type of costs to the township. Is that clear?
No, it does. It assumes more conservatively that those numbers are baked, those services are baked into this number. They in all likelihood, because services will be provided privately, they would not incur those costs to the township, and this number would actually be lower.
Okay, that was part of the one question. The next question would be, if in fact your model that you referred to, or the model that you said about a 4-bedroom modeling, would the school district expenditures for 26 students then effectively, and now for 9, it's $216,000. Would that, just for a round number's sake, triple? Would that go up to 600,000 for 26 students?
Just thinking rough numbers, yes, because I'm using the same number per student.
Okay.
That's derived from the school district budget.
So that, in fact, would have a deleterious effect on the net school district fiscal number, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And obviously, the revenues that Mr. Howder already pointed out, that these homes sell for $1 million plus to $1.5 million, obviously all the tax revenues will absorb that, because 26, if there are 26 kids or whatever, and that's mixed, that could be effectively not have any impact on this fiscal study because of the selling price being increased by roughly 30%. So
it would certainly increase.
That's all I have. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, it would certainly increase the tax revenue if the value was.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shooter. Gloria Johnston, any questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Sherry, any questions?
Yeah, one quick question and then a point of information. Concerning, for Mr. Hetzel, you mentioned that the 5% real estate transfer tax, you're using 5% turnover yearly, is that correct?
That's what I used in this analysis, right?
And that 5% comes from where?
That's anecdotal. You're free to, the purpose of this type of a study is you can take that number and say, what if it's 1/10 of that, or what if it's twice that?
Right, because that's what just, when you said 5%, so these people are going to buy $1 million home, 2 of them are going to move out the first year, and every subsequent year, by 10 years, the entire community is turned over. That's,
I think the point is, even if you remove the transfer tax township altogether, you're still in a net positive.
Understood. I was just, the turnover rate just seemed very high to me. That's all. And for Mr. Rice, I have a point of information.
I'm sorry?
For Mr. Rice?
Yes.
I have a point of information. Originally, this exhibit, this fiscal impact, when it was uploaded on the website, was Appendix A of Exhibit A-2A. Concerning in A-2A is the overall density modification redevelopment of 208 and 228 Stratford Ave. 18.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, I'm losing your voice. You're talking away from the computer and I can't hear you.
I was trying to read a sheet of paper. I'm sorry. That A2-2A, which was a statement that was prepared for Mr. Hatter and then compiled by Mr. Brosman and Mr. Raleigh, which I had a question concerning specifically, which applies to this, that I would like to hear their explanation for under their land use. I know, and so my point of information is, A1, can this witness speak to that report, or will it be addressed at a different time?
I don't understand your question, Mr. Sherry. What?
Okay, I'll go slow. This fiscal impact summary.
Correct.
Is Appendix A.
Okay.
Of Exhibit A-2A, which is an overall encompassing report on the density modification redevelopment of the property, which was prepared for Mr. Hatter and compiled by Mr. Brosman and Mr. Raleigh. In there, they go through each of the requirements, and I have a specific question under the land use subset of that A2-A. So my question is, can Mr. Hetzel, who has basically just spoken about the financial portion of Appendix A of the overall exhibit. Can he speak to this, to my question on land use, or will that be addressed at a different point?
Well, this is the last witness, so why don't you answer your question, and let's see if Mr. Hetzel can answer it, and if not, we'll see if there's anyone else that can.
Okay, so under Exhibit A-2A, under land use, which is what this discussion has all been about, we've been told that other things will move to land development. Under land use, the report specifically cites Radnor's comprehensive plan and quotes, accommodate reasonable growth using innovative growth management techniques such as transit-oriented developments, traditional neighborhood design, and other flexible design techniques that harmonize the existing and enhance the existing communities. So my question to whoever can answer it, since you are applying under the land use and you cite Radnor's comprehensive plan, how do you apply that statement to this proposed densely populated townhome community as it enhances the existing single-family community?
Mr. Hetzel, can you answer that question?
I didn't do a review of the comprehensive plan. I wasn't part of the author. I was not an author of that statement in the plan. So I'm not prepared to speak to that as planner at this time.
Okay. Mr. Sherry, this is probably a question that maybe Mr. Lambert could have tried to answer. I think he did get asked this question. And, you know, you're going to have to, I guess, make some argument based on what you just read to the board that this isn't consistent with the comprehensive plan, this proposed development. But that particular question, this gentleman can't answer that question. So let's go to another question for Mr. Hetzel. Do you have another one?
I do not, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zari? Any questions?
Yes, I'm sorry. Was there a study, were you asked to do a study that was based on single family homes as opposed to attached homes?
I did some of my own calculations so I might understand what the relative impacts might be, but I was never asked to do that for submission in this application.
Okay, and you would, I'm assuming then that information wouldn't be available unless your client allowed that information to be presented.
That would be my client's discretion, correct?
Okay, thank you. Let me just take a look at a note here. The homes, and this is going to get back to the number of children. These homes are 4,000 square feet in size, and the assumption is then that a portion of them would be potentially a single occupant, or an empty nester family, or a family with one child. I'm just trying to fathom the logic that someone would use to purchase a house of that size without a need for room for children. But I'm sorry, that's not even a question. I withdraw that. Those are all the comments I have.
Thank you. Mr. McGowan for the Serenes. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Jennifer Richard Sarhadi, any questions? Ted Heimel, any questions? Caitlin O'Sullivan, any questions?
No questions.
Mary Beth Tarunian, any questions? Dave Satterfield, any questions? Mary Ann Mahoney, any questions?
No, thank you.
Bryn Smythe or Jack Rubin, any questions? Brent or Nicole Moore, any questions? Mr. and Mrs. Chawla, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. and Mrs. Willis, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gato, any questions of the witness?
Yes, I'm just curious, Eric, if any of your reports, how they performed over time. Has anybody ever benchmarked what you provided to your clients, to the citizens? Has anybody ever gone back and said, hey, he was absolutely right, or he was way off, or he was somewhere in between? Has any study been done on that?
Not that I know of, no.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Batt, any questions?
No, thank you.
Mr. Hoyle?
Eric, the analysis, I take it it's pretty linear, meaning if you reduce the density of the townhomes for every, it's still about $30,000 of net, assuming all your assumptions, it's still about $30,000 of net revenue to the township per townhome. There's a linearity to it, so you could add townhomes and just keep on increasing the value to the township.
Is that a question or a?
No, yeah. Is it purely a linear? If you looked at it, is it purely linear?
No, if you assume other aspects, there could be different bedroom mix. They could be different values for houses. It could be different unit types.
No, yeah, but I guess. Oh, sorry. I guess my question is, if you did 31 townhomes of the same exact, using the same exact assumptions, it would still be 31 times whatever that $30,000 average. It would be exactly 1/4 less revenue to the township.
I haven't done the math, but that sounds reasonable.
Yeah. And if that were to occur, then it would probably reduce the long tail risk that some of the commissioners are worried about in terms of density and school children. If you reduce the density of their homes, do you then reduce that long tail risk of having to add trailers as the commissioners were concerned about?
There was no testimony about a long tail risk.
My terminology, not his.
Yeah, the objection's
Sorry.
over. Go ahead, Mr. Hetzel, if you can answer that.
I'm not going to speak to long-term or long-tail risks for two. I can speak to annual impacts. Sure, if there are fewer townhomes, there will be fewer kids and lower costs to the school district, but there will also be lower tax revenues, so a lower net impact. You can look at it the other way and say if you add density and have more townhomes, you're going to have a higher net impact, net positive impact.
Thank you. That's all.
Mr. Hoyle, anything else?
No, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Rushman, anything for this witness?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Raleigh, any other witnesses that you wish to present or any redirect to this witness?
I do not have any redirect. We would reserve the right to bring rebuttal witnesses if necessary, and then also reserve the right to make a summary at before the record closes or a conclusion, but that's all the witnesses we have.
Okay. So just one housekeeping item. I'm going to mark a board exhibit as B1. This is a letter that was received by me today from Phil Rosenwig and Kevin McGowan entering their appearance on the behalf of the Serene. So that's a letter dated February 2nd, 2021, and I'll mark that as B1 as a board exhibit. With respect to further testimony, there's two issues to discuss. One is whether any of the parties, the resident parties, wish to present sworn testimony. And that would be either testifying yourself or calling expert witnesses or putting on some other type of testimony, which you have the right to do. So let me just ask, I'll go through the list again, whether any of the parties wish to present any additional testimony. Mr. Shuda. Do you wish to present any testimony? And I'll say it's probably not going to happen tonight. Maybe for another night. The Johnstons, any testimony?
No, not tonight.
Mr. Sherry?
No.
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear that.
No, Mr. Rice.
Okay, Mr. Zari, any testimony?
I do have a question relative to proper procedure, and that would be, in this particular discussion, does the township have the right to ask the developer for alternate studies of the site? In other words, and let me qualify that just a bit before you answer. We've seen two options. One is the single family home, and the other is strictly a townhouse version, but there may be an option that satisfies the residents and the township, and may even satisfy the developer.
I'm going to jump in. We have not presented different options. This is a conditional use application for the proposed development that is on our conditional use plans. We do not have any options before the board.
Okay. Mr. Zari, to answer your question, what's in front of the board is the plan that they presented. Options or different configurations or different accesses or things that would come up during the land development process, but not as part of this proceeding. This is a proceeding, as I've said, it's quasi judicial. We have to do it this way so there's a record made and the record is clear, and there'll be a decision based on what the record is, not based on some future study. So let me ask you again, do you intend to present any testimony?
Under those conditions, no, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. McGowan, on behalf of your client, how about you?
No testimony. Thank you.
Sorhadis, Mr. and Mrs. Sorhadi. Mr. Heimel? Ms. O'Sullivan?
No.
Mr. Satterfield? Mary Ann Mahoney?
No.
Bryn Smythe or Jack Rubin? Brenda Nicole Moore? Mr. Chawla?
No testimony.
Mr. and Mrs. Willis?
No, thank you.
Mr. Gato?
Not tonight, but potentially in the future.
Mr. Batt?
No, thank you.
Mr. Hoyle?
No, thank you.
And Ms. Rushman?
Not tonight, thank you.
Okay. So what I heard is that no one has any witnesses or intends to present any additional testimony or documents for the record. There has been a request, however, from some of the parties for a site walk, which would involve the Board of Commissioners visiting and walking the site. And what I'd like to do, Norma, let's just go off the record so we can have a discussion. And then if there's some agreement, we'll come back on the record for any kind of a site walk. Under the planning code,
John, just for 1 second, off the record, does it mean we're still recording?
No, I'm not. When it's off the record, I'm not recording.
No, thanks, Norma. I mean the YouTube channel. I just didn't know if that needed to be turned off, or do we keep it running?
no, we can keep.
I'm posing the question.
Yeah, we can keep that running. You know, the people that are on this call are all parties. But I just don't want to burden Norma with a lot of back and forth discussion with people talking over each other. So the request has been made by resident parties for a site walk by the board. Now, under the planning code, that's permissible, provided that there's notice. But it becomes a little bit unmanageable because we can't bring typically our court reporter along with us. So a site walk would be just that, a site walk. It wouldn't be an opportunity for arguments to be made. It wouldn't be an opportunity to present any kind of lobbying of board members. It would be a site walk where someone would have to essentially, and typically it's going to be the applicant or the applicant's engineer, just describe the property and the out boundaries and where the adjacent properties are. We could videotape it. That's a possibility. And again, that, you know, that would have to be by agreement. And I haven't discussed this with the Board of Commissioners. This came up over the last week. But I guess let me ask first of all, in terms of the applicant, this is your application. Do you have any objection to a site walk by the board?
Yeah, we would have an objection. I just want to make a clarification. As I read Mr. Shuda's email, it asked to walk the borders of the property, and it also requested a tour of the borders of the property. And Mr. Shuda, I believe you're on the line, so correct me if I'm wrong, of both the property involved in this application as well as a separate property that is not involved in this application that's under a preliminary land development review currently. So we would certainly object to a site visit to what we've been calling the Eagle Road property, which is not subject to this application. And I think because of some of the concerns regarding keeping a clean record in this case, as well as, you know, this is our third night of testimony. We have, I believe, 20 exhibits that we've submitted. Many of them depict either the existing conditions or proposed conditions on the property. And we also have, before tonight, I believe there were some additional parties given party status tonight, but before tonight, we have 23 parties to this application. So for all those concerns, we would object.
And if I may just add on to that, Mr. Rice, that I would say that if the board has some data point that is critical to the conditional use decision that would be solved with a site walk, you know, we would certainly be open to that feedback from the board. I guess just practically, my thoughts run to the fact that if there is some information point related to conditional use that the board is looking for, I think that actually can be more precisely solved through a plan review or a detailed plan review of the borders or the edges or the site parameters, if that's the point of the site walk. The site walk at this stage, just thinking snow and the condition, I'm just not sure.
I don't think anybody's interested in walking in the snow. And I'm not sure when we're going to not have snow. Site walks are usually helpful to actually get a feel for the property. I've done it many times during hearings on big properties. I think the request here is from the residents so that you have, so that the board has a visual of what the adjacent properties look like with respect to this property. So there's always some value to it. I just want to reiterate, I just heard from your counsel. You're all objecting to any site walk. No, just this property. We're not talking about the other property, just this property. So there's an objection to the site walk occurring before a board decision. I mean, it would have to be before the board came to any kind of decision.
Yeah, and I would say, as an aside, full stop, yes, correct. I think in what you said. I think, though, that said, I want to be sure that the board understands that we want to be responsive to anything that the board may be looking to answer. And as I said earlier, obviously, when we get into the land development, as a practical matter, that when we get into the land development process, going through those borders, whether with board members or with neighbors, to talk about those details is something that we would welcome.
Okay.
Guys,
So,
I apologize. I need to jump in because I'm getting paged upstairs. I've got a newborn who apparently needs me. I've been to the site. I know what the site looks like. If the board has an appetite to go, I'm perfectly happy to come with. I don't need to go myself in order to see the site just because I'm already generally familiar with it. Otherwise, John, is there anything in particular that you need from me? It feels like we're wrapping up and I don't want to leave Bobby in the lurch here.
no, I think you're fine, Commissioner Larkin. Let me just, what's the rest of the board's desire regarding the site walk? I mean, we can discuss it now. We can discuss it offline.
I think we should walk the site so that we get a sense of the trees and the neighbors' houses. I think walking the site would be very beneficial.
Okay.
Yeah, and to clarify, I'm not opposed to it. For me, I know what it looks like.
I'm willing to walk the site if we can arrange that.
Okay. I think Commissioner Farhi's offline. Commissioner Abel, what's your? Or Commissioner Borowski?
I'm willing to walk it. I feel like I've seen a lot. I'm very, I'm familiar with that area. I know the site. I also sat through the shade tree presentation on this site. So I feel like I've seen a lot of the plan, but I'm certainly willing to walk it.
Okay. And Mr. Shuda, I think you made the request for the site walk. What would be the purpose from the residents' point of view of the site walk? She's still with us?
I don't see him on the call any longer.
Yeah, I don't see him.
Okay.
Mark Gato, I think what Joe was asking for is to have the developer and the board stand in the shoes of the residents here and see some of the things that we see on a daily basis in terms of traffic, which we believe the traffic study has not covered, and stormwater, just so we can collaborate with the developer on workarounds or solutions to prevent further flooding in our homes.
Okay.
Mr. Rice, the only thing I guess suggest is that would seem to be more part of the land development process. I'm just not sure what.
Well, we'd like to see it now before. We think earlier is better, Charlie.
Yeah.
It's good to collect data early in a process when you're trying to solve problems than after the fact.
Well, they're
Do you agree with that? That seems really reasonable.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we don't. I've offered it up multiple times. I just don't know. I'm just trying to discern how it's germane to the board's CU process.
Yeah, we're making it a part of the conditional use application, I think is what's being suggested.
Right.
Yes.
And I just, from a practical standpoint, how do we have that be of record, and how many people, and how do we move safely around in the conditions, that the weather conditions and otherwise?
Sounds like an organization that's
So,
working-
hi, this is Commissioner Mulroney. I think we understand the issues about why we should or should not go at this time. So, John, can we suggest that maybe that's a conversation that the commissioners have with you, and then we'll reach back out about, whether or not we want to go as a formal exploration of the.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, let's discuss it offline. I'll say to the residents, if the commissioners, and it could be one or two or three, in a group, it could be one at a time, want to walk the site, we can't have 22 residents, all parties there at the same time. There's got to be a representative of the residents group. So there's some control. The weather obviously has got to get better to do a site walk. And I guess we'd have to convince Mr. Howder that it would be a good thing to do right now if the board wants to do it. I don't particularly see any harm to it, but there is some mechanics. And quite frankly, if there's 3 or 4 board members all at one time, we probably are going to have to videotape it. I don't know how else to make the record of that other than to do it that way, and then make it part of the record. The applicant would obviously have to be there, but we can't have all the parties walking around. I'd have some concern. So the board will discuss it offline. In terms of tonight, there's no more testimony to be taken tonight. I heard that there may be some resident testimony. Is there any objection from the applicant to keep the record open for at least until next Monday?
So, sorry, just to clarify, are we scheduling another hearing for public comment?
Well, I think the public comment can occur. The board's going to have to vote on this at a public meeting. So it'll be on as an agenda item at some point, and there'll be public comment taken at that time. Once the record's closed. Once the record's closed, just so the residents know, once the record's closed, the board has to make a written decision within 45 days. So my suggestion is that we not close the record tonight, keep it open until next Monday. And between now and next Monday, if any residents want to present sworn testimony, they need to notify me and the board that you intend to present sworn testimony. Between now and next Monday, I think we need to resolve the site visit also and how that would get handled. But I need to discuss that offline with the full board, see who's interested. Some of the board members have been there, some have not, and then work out any mechanics that we need to work out with the applicant and the residents. Is there any objection from the applicant to keeping the record open until next Monday, which would be February 8th?
We do not have an objection. We just would like the opportunity to make a closing statement prior to the record closing.
Okay. Well, if you want to make a closing statement, it sounds like we're going to probably have another night of testimony, right? Unless you want to do it now.
I leave that up to the discretion of the board, whether you want to do that tonight or on another night. But that's the only additional, testimony that we're intending to offer.
Yes, my only concern is, John, continuing, it looks like we've only got 4 commissioners left on this call. I think we just have myself, Commissioner Mulroney, Commissioner Booker, and I think Commissioner Abel is still on also. So we've lost 3 board members.
Okay, well, we're going to have to we're gonna have to schedule another, hopefully short night if there's any additional testimony and for closing argument on behalf of the applicant. So sometime this week, the township and the board will come up with some dates to schedule that, and then we should be able to wrap everything up that night. But if any of the residents, I'm going to reiterate, want to present sworn testimony, I'll need to know before next Monday. Send me an email, tell me what you intend to do, or any kind of written documents that you want to present. It would all be subject to objection by the applicant, but please let me know so that everybody has an opportunity to present whatever they want to present.
And Mr. Rice, just one other housekeeping issue. If we could just at some point go back on the record briefly, just so I could move our exhibits into the record.
Okay. All right. Well, let's, and I want to put this discussion on the record also. So, okay, let's, Norma, let's go back on the record.
Mhm.
Okay, Mr. Rowley, you want to move admission of your exhibits, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And we're talking about A1 through
A20.
A20. Okay. The exhibits will be admitted, and the board and the parties, and Norma, this is for the record also, the board and the parties had a discussion about the need for another night of testimony. The applicant has presented its case in chief, and any residents that wish to present sworn testimony, documentation into the record have until next Monday, February 8th, to inform the board and myself that they intend to do that. There was also a discussion about a site visit to the property. There's been a request from some of the residents that the board do a site visit on the property. The applicant is objecting to that at this point, and there's been no determination on when and if that would occur. The board will discuss that offline, and between now and next Monday, there'll be some further discussion about a site visit, what the rules are, who can attend, what can occur, and how that could be documented. I'm assuming, Norma, that you don't typically go out on site visits in the snow. So fortunately for you, you won't be invited, but we may videotape it. So that was the discussion. There's been nothing resolved or decided on that, and nothing's been scheduled. And is there anything else that anyone wants to add? Mr. Rowley, you want to add anything else?
I don't have anything further tonight.
Okay, so with that, then the hearing's closed for tonight. And if the board wants to make a motion to adjourn, we can go. Board of Supervisors, Commissioners, I'm
All
sorry.
right, I so moved. Do we have a second?
So move, second.
We're adjourned.
All in favor? Aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, thank you.
Good evening.